Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Today, we will explore together a story full of mysteries and strange things that not everyone can explain. A story that makes you ask, is the truth always what we see? Come join me in a world where shadows lurk in the dark, and unforgettable memories still cling even after time has passed. Don't forget to press like and subscribe, so that every night, we can meet again, amidst vague memories and unsolved secrets. As night fell, I found myself alone in a place seemingly untouched by time, silent, resilient, and full of secrets. The air was heavy, as if the whole world was holding its breath. This house, long abandoned by its owner, is located at the edge of a desolate forest, where the only sound is the whisper of the wind passing through the tall grass. Around it was a vast and deserted land, with no signs of life, except for an occasional rustle in the trees. When I arrived, the air enveloped me like a suffocating fog. The tall grass near the house swayed unnaturally, bending in shapes unlike the wind. A slight creak echoed in the walls of the house, but the wind wasn't strong enough to disturb anything. I've been here many times before, and have never had any problems. But as soon as I parked the car in front of the old wooden house, a shiver ran down my spine. The weather turned cold, and the sky above seemed dark, as if even the sky refused to shine. I hurried inside and turned on the light to chase away the darkness. But the silence in the house felt even heavier. I looked out the large window near the living room, feeling like someone was looking at me from the outside. No one, at least none that I could see. And then, silence filled everything again. It was not just ordinary silence, but a terrifying silence, full of unanswered questions. The first day passed without anything strange. I checked the plumbing, adjusted a few electrical wires, and took inventory of the tools in the warehouse. But it was only when I noticed the large warehouse at the end of the lot that I realized the feeling of constant anxiety. That warehouse was not like a normal warehouse, it was old and rotten, like a relic forgotten by time. Located in the middle of a desolate land, the warehouse stood there like a witness to the past, rotten wood and rusty metal hanging. The old tractor sat in a far corner, and the long metal chains hung down in pieces, covered in rust. The more I looked, the more I felt a strange feeling, as if this warehouse had a pulse of its own that I couldn't explain. As night falls, the feeling of loneliness in the house becomes more evident. The only light in the house comes from a lamp in the living room, and a night light in my room. Other corners seem to be swallowed by darkness, as if the house was gradually being plunged into darkness. I tried reading a book, but the silence made each page turn like an echo in an empty space. Every sound rang out as a reminder of the inexplicable stillness. I decided to go out to relieve the tension in my head, thinking that a walk might help me relax more. The moon dimly illuminated the sky, dense clouds obscured the light. My flashlight pierced the darkness, illuminating the tall grasses that swayed with each gentle breeze. It feels like someone is watching me, even though there is no one but me on this earth. Silence reigned over everything, no crickets chirping, no owls hooting, nothing. It feels like nature is also holding its breath, waiting for something. This time, I once again stopped in front of the warehouse. A feeling of curiosity and fear made me approach, even though there was no particular reason to enter. This warehouse always makes me feel strange, filled with old tools that no one uses anymore. The warehouse door was locked tightly, not for security reasons, but to prevent wild animals from entering. I approached, and suddenly I felt a slight vibration from the warehouse itself, as if it were alive. My flashlight flashed, and in that moment, I heard a sound. At first I thought it was just the wind blowing through the door, but the sound was clear, a soft whistle that gradually grew louder. My heart beats faster. A feeling of fear spread through me. Right now, I can't think of any reasonable reason to explain that sound. The warehouse door is tightly closed, with no gaps for wind to enter. And then the whistling sound grew louder and clearer, as if someone was making it on purpose. I approached the warehouse door, my hand shaking as I touched the lock. At that moment, the sound suddenly stopped. I opened the warehouse door, the light from the flashlight shone in, illuminating the old tools, full of dust and the smell of rotten wood. Inside, everything is quiet. Nothing moved. The feeling of tension kept rising inside me. I checked every corner, every shelf, even the cab of the old tractor. But there was no one, no signs of anything unusual. I locked the warehouse door and returned to the house, but the feeling of fear still did not let me go. The house remained silent, as if waiting for something. As I went back inside, closed the door and tried to regain my composure, I heard the whistle again. This time, the sound came from right outside my bedroom window. A feeling of fear overwhelmed me in that moment. My heart was pounding. I stood up and walked step by step towards the window. The moon's dim light shone down, and I saw nothing but darkness. The whistling still continued, as if it were hanging outside the window, waiting. I pulled up the curtain and looked out. There's no one. Yet, I still felt like someone was looking at me, as if waiting for me to open my eyes again. I can't sleep. That feeling kept haunting me, so much so that I couldn't close my eyes. The long night went on, and the whistling never stopped. The night is long, but sleep still cannot find me. Every time I close my eyes, I feel drawn into another space, where darkness is constantly pouring in and something silently, patiently waits. It's not that I'm afraid of the dark, I know I've lived in the dark all my life, only this time, the silence is too scary. I turned around in the blanket, my hands were still cold even though the temperature in the room was not low. A small noise sounded from the window, like something falling. A cold feeling ran down my spine. I slowly sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked out the window, where darkness still prevailed, with no signs of any life other than the dim light of the moon. Suddenly, I heard the whistle again. But this time, the sound was not from outside the window but from deep inside the house. It's gentle, but there's a tenacity in each melody. I can't bear it anymore. I stood up and walked out of the room, my legs shaking as if they no longer belonged to me. I followed the whistle, the flashlight in my hand illuminating a dim path in the darkness. Entering the living room, I suddenly realized that the silence had changed. It was no longer the usual silence. A feeling of being watched enveloped me, as if thousands of eyes were following my every move. And then, I saw it. A dark shadow stood silently in the corner of the room. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, an illusion from the faint light of the flashlight. But as I approached, the shadow became more than just a dark shape in the night. It stood there, looking at me with eyes that glowed like fire, eyes that were not human. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. The whole space seemed to freeze, and the only sound was the strong beating in my chest. The shadow didn't move, didn't do anything, just stood there, as if waiting. It feels like time stops. Everything around me became blurred, only that shadow remained, standing firm like a ghost, challenging me to face it. Then, the whistle sounded again, this time not just a simple sound, but a gentle, yet powerful melody. It repeats each note slowly, as if there is a message hidden in it. A feeling of fear rose within me, but at the same time, I couldn't take my eyes off that shadow. Suddenly, the shadow moved. It started moving, but not the way I thought it would. It didn't move towards me but instead stepped into the darkness, towards the window. A strange feeling crept over me, as if I was caught up in a game whose rules I couldn't understand. But I can't stand still. I started to follow, without thinking, just an instinctive reaction. I walked towards the window, where the shadow disappeared into the thick night air. As I approached the window, I saw something that I couldn't believe my eyes. Another figure, this time larger, stood just under the dim moonlight. It was a person, or something like a person, with eyes that sparkled like stars, the light reflecting from the moon shining on strands of ice-white hair. That person stood still, not moving, just looking at me from afar. The whistle sounded again, this time clearer, so clear that I could feel its breathing. It's reminding me of something, but I can't understand it. With every step I took, it rang louder. And then, I felt like someone was pulling me, taking me into another world, where I couldn't return. I couldn't get out. An invisible force swept me along, pulling me out of the house, past the doors that were creaking like whispers. I couldn't see anything else but those eyes, bright eyes looking at me from the darkness. Every step I take is like a journey through another dimension, where time no longer exists, and reality seems to be cracked into fragments. I am no longer in the house. I no longer felt the earth beneath my feet or heard the breath of the wind. Everything is in darkness. There are only those sparkling eyes, watching me from everywhere, as if they were part of this space, of this world. I tried to find my way back, but the space around me began to distort. The walls of the house seemed to gradually melt and blur like a painting blurred in the rain. Objects in the house began to melt and then blend together, forming strange, unidentifiable shapes. An old wooden chair suddenly turned into a living creature, with long arms reaching out, dragging strange footprints on the floor. I turned around, panicked, and looked towards the window where I had just seen that figure. It still stood there, with glowing eyes, but now it was no longer human. Those eyes were deep, like endless abyss, no longer reflecting light from the moon, but now, they shined on their own, like cold flames. A cold wind blew past, and I heard a voice. It was not the voice of one person, but something beyond words, a sound from deep within, from another world. That voice was full of strange resonances, echoing in the space. "We are waiting." I couldn't understand the words, but a feeling of fear enveloped my entire body. That shadow no longer stood still, but began to move towards me. It did not walk like a human, but seemed to slide along the ground, not touching any object, as if it did not belong to this world. I turned around and ran like crazy, my legs couldn't move. Everything around me is changing. The room I stood in suddenly cracked, as if a crack in the earth's crust, and I felt like I was falling into an endless void. Everything around me sank into a dark space, and the sound of whistling, although gentle, echoed everywhere. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. But those weren't my footsteps. I turned around, but didn't see anyone. There was only thick darkness, as if an invisible gravity pulled me inside. Those footsteps sounded again, this time closer. A long arm reached out from the darkness and gently touched my shoulder. I turned around, but couldn't see anything but a mist. But then, I realized. Those eyes still looked at me, from the same darkness, but this time, their light became sharp, like sharp blades, making it impossible for me to look straight at them. A laugh, gentle but filled with brutality, rang out from the darkness. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The world around me began to change, moving as if it didn't really exist. Everything seemed to crumble, and I fell into another space, where time no longer followed its rules. Then I found myself standing in a long, dark hallway, with closed doors all around. These doors were unlike any I had seen before. They have a strange attraction, as if they are calling to me. I couldn't resist, even though every step I took made my sense of fear stronger. A door opened slightly. And behind it, was a large room, dimly lit in the dark. I walked in, and a cold wind suddenly blew, as if someone was standing right next to me. The whistle sounded again, but this time, the sound was not from outer space, but from inside the room. A blurry figure appeared in front of me. I couldn't see clearly, I just knew that it wasn't human. It had no discernible shape, but was a strange mixture of darkness and light, moving as if it were playing with me, teasing me with its presence. I couldn't do anything but stand and watch, my eyes unable to take their eyes off that figure. Suddenly, an arm reached out from the darkness and gently touched my shoulder again. This time, I felt a pull, as if someone wanted to take me into another world, a world I couldn't escape from. The space around me seemed to be shrinking, every smallest noise became creepy. I stood panting in the dark, clutching my flashlight as my only protection, even though I knew it couldn't stop anything. The storm outside continued to roar, shaking the old walls of the house. But in that moment, I felt like I was lost in another world, a world where time and space were distorted, and everything around me was changing in ways I couldn't understand. I returned to the living room, trying to calm the pounding heartbeat in my chest. The feeling of confusion and insecurity still does not let me go. My mind was spinning, vague images of the warehouse, of strange marks on the floor, and that strange whistling sound kept haunting me. The storm was still roaring, but I couldn't focus on anything except the overwhelming urge to get back to the warehouse. There's something waiting for me there. And I can't help but feel that someone is watching me, quietly from afar, waiting for me to do something wrong. At this moment, the confused thoughts in my head were no longer rational. I stood up, walked towards the window, then looked out again. The storm still tore through the old trees in the garden, but the sky was no longer bright. It was pitch black, as if the sky was ready to swallow everything below it. I saw flashes of light from the lightning outside, shining through the window. The light seemed to be drawing strange images on the wall. A whistle sounded, this time clearer than ever. It didn't come from far away but echoed right inside the house, almost right outside the window. The whistling sound was like an invitation, a strange attraction that I couldn't resist. I felt every hair on my body stand up, but I couldn't leave the room. Some invisible force made me stop. It's hard to describe the feeling right now. Everything in the house no longer seems real. Dark corners, shadows, all moving in my sight. The shadowy figures flashed and disappeared instantly, as if they existed only for a moment in a dream. A sound rang out again. This time, it came from deep inside the warehouse, not a whistle, but the rustling of something moving. This feeling is so strange. I can't explain it. Every feeling inside me felt like it was controlled by an invisible force. I walked towards the warehouse door, tightening my grip on the flashlight. Every step was heavy, as if I was walking through a layer of water, feeling like I couldn't escape. But I have to go. I cannot ignore these strange things. As I stood in front of the warehouse door, I noticed something strange. The door opened easily, without any resistance. I took a deep breath, then walked in. The air inside seemed more oppressive than ever, as if something was waiting for me. I swept the flashlight everywhere, the light skimming over shelves, tools left haphazardly, but nothing out of the ordinary. However, once again, the light from the flashlight flashed and illuminated a mark on the floor. A single footprint, clearly printed in the thick layer of dust, was the same size as mine, but oddly askew. That footprint was unlike any I had ever seen. The edges of the footprints appeared blurred, as if they had been twisted unnaturally. I leaned closer to check. No way. The footprint resembled that of a person, but it wasn't exactly the same. I touched the dust, and as soon as I straightened up, a whistle sounded from somewhere above my head. This time, the sound was almost a passing sound, making me feel suffocated, my throat tight. I turned on the flashlight, aiming it above the rafters. It was empty, but it felt like something lightly scratched the air. I backed away quickly, not daring to look at the rafters anymore. It feels like I'm standing on the brink of something I can't explain. Something beyond my control. I felt more vulnerable than ever, as if there was no safe place. I turned and ran out of the warehouse, not daring to look back. The warehouse door slammed shut behind me, and this time, I locked it tightly, even though I knew nothing could hold me back for long. I quickly went back inside, locked the door, and checked the window again. My heart was still pounding, and my mind was full of confused thoughts. I tried to sit down, but it felt impossible to settle down. The strange whistles and footprints all seemed to be following me, reminding me that I was never truly alone in this house. Every time I think I understand what's going on, something new, scarier, appears. After closing the warehouse door tightly, I sat down and tried to regain my composure. My heart was still racing, as if my body couldn't hold back the tension. Everything around me seemed to become blurry, but an inexplicable feeling kept rising within me. There is something waiting, quietly, in the darkness. A feeling that I cannot escape. I told myself to stay calm. These are just strange phenomena. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe it was the storm that made my mind unstable. But just as I thought that, a whistle sounded again, this time clear and almost coming from right outside the window. My heart sank. This sound could not have been caused by the wind. It had a distinct tone, as if someone was deliberately trying to deceive me. I stood up and hurried towards the window. Once again, the sky was dark, without any light from the moon shining down. The storm was still roaring, the wind blew strong as if it wanted to tear everything around. I looked through the window, and this time, I saw something. A dark shadow passed by, so fast that I couldn't determine what it was. A cold feeling ran down my spine. I didn't know if it was a person or some other creature, but I felt its presence, clearly and suddenly. My heart clenched in a panic, but I couldn't turn away. That shadow was still standing out there, almost in darkness, but its bright eyes still shone towards me. Its light was unlike any I had ever seen. It did not reflect, but emanated from the eyes themselves. I shivered, but couldn't take my eyes off that look. Suddenly, that shadow began to move, but not in a human way. It passed by as if it didn't touch the ground, as if it didn't really exist in this world. Every step it took carried a terrifying stillness, but its presence made the air around me heavy and full of pressure. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the shadow stopped. It stood still, and I realized that it wasn't just standing there, it was watching me. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, as if I was being drawn into a conversation in which I could not participate. A cold wind blew through, making the windows shake. But I couldn't take my eyes off that shadow. Suddenly, another whistle sounded, this time louder, as if a group of people were whistling at the same time. That sound cut through the air, hitting my ears hard, making me feel dizzy. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. I can't move. The shadow moved again, this time towards the warehouse. My heart was pounding, I felt a feeling of despair rising in my chest. I couldn't let that shadow into the warehouse where I discovered the strange footprints. But as soon as I thought of that, the shadow disappeared into the darkness. I don't know what to do next. The feeling of fear and helplessness increases every second. I stood still, not knowing whether to continue investigating or return to the house. But something inside me couldn't give up. I must know the truth, no matter what the cost. I walked out, heading towards the warehouse again. This time, I no longer used the flashlight. With every step I took, the dim light from the warehouse was just enough for me to recognize the strange shadows around me. The silhouettes had no clear shape, they just passed by quickly as if they were monitoring me from all sides. Every step I took became heavier, as if an invisible weight was pulling me down. As I approached the warehouse door, I felt like my heart was about to jump out of my chest. Once again, I opened the door, but this time, there weren't any surprises. It opened easily, as if the warehouse had been waiting for me for a long time. Inside the warehouse, the air was still as stuffy as before. I continued going in, feeling like I was entering a maze, where space and time had been turned upside down. A flash of lightning illuminated the old tools, making them look like ghosts reaching out. I scanned every corner with my flashlight, but there was no one. However, at that moment, I noticed something strange. A shadow stood at the far end of the warehouse, but this time, it wasn't someone I knew. It was a blurry, indistinct figure, as if it were not human. A cold chill ran down my spine as I realized that figure was staring at me. This feeling is indescribable. I want to run, but I can't. The shadow continued to move, and just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder from behind. I turned around, but there was no one. I don't know where I am anymore. The whole space seemed to be melting away, as if I had been drawn into a place that did not belong to me. I feel like I'm not myself anymore. A sound rang out in the air, a whistle, but this time, it was no longer a melody. It was a calling, as if an invitation from another world. Entering the warehouse again, I felt like I was walking in a foreign land. The warehouse is no longer the place to store the old tools and piles of wooden crates that I once saw. This space seems to have been distorted, like part of a nightmare that cannot be escaped. The feeling of confusion and disorientation made it almost impossible for me to perceive time and space clearly. The flashlight's light streaked across the damp walls, each beam carrying a new fear. Tools, old tractors, and metal scraps are no longer simply inanimate objects. They seem to be alive. The wrenches, the screws, the rusted pieces of metal, all lay motionless, but I could feel them watching me from every corner. With every step I took, the space became darker and more oppressive. There was no sound, only the sound of my breathing, and sometimes strange noises coming from hidden corners. But I can't give up. Something inside me made it impossible for me to leave without finding an answer to all of this. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the space around me for a moment. In that moment, I saw a twisted figure, as if a shadow was moving through the shelves, but as soon as I turned around, it disappeared instantly. My heart was pounding, my throat was dry, as if an invisible force was suffocating me. This time, I couldn't keep calm anymore. There was a time when I thought I would never escape this house, but then, a strange thought flashed in my mind: maybe this wasn't an ordinary house. This could be a door, a threshold leading to another world. A world where I don't belong. At that moment, I realized that this house was not just about whistles or passing shadows. It has a strange power. It is dominating me, controlling me. The marks I found on the warehouse floor were not accidental. Those are signs, instructions that lead me to a deeper place, a place where I cannot return. Suddenly, a loud noise rang out from behind me. I turned around, and my heart stopped beating. A figure stood right behind me. But that's not a real person. It was tall, with an unclear shape, as if its body was made of darkness. The light from my flashlight revealed strange details on its body. It had long arms, but the hands were not human, the fingers stretched and twisted like dry twigs. Its eyes, if I could call them eyes, emitted a cold, emotionless light, as if it were not a living creature but a shadow, an illusion. The feeling of shock and fear made me unable to breathe. I wanted to scream, but my mouth was dry and I couldn't say anything. Its eyes seemed to be looking at me, piercing through every layer of skin, as if it was searching for something in me. Part of me wanted to run away, but I felt frozen, like I was trapped in that gaze, unable to escape. A cold wind blew, and I realized that it wasn't just darkness that was enveloping me. The space around me started to disappear, as if it was being torn apart. The warehouse walls, the tools, all melted into blurred images, as if I were falling into an unreal space. I felt like I was sinking into a bottomless abyss, where there was no light, no hope. And then, the whistling sounded again, this time closer, as if the shadow itself was whistling. It carried a strange melody, not that of a human. That whistle seemed to call me, as if it was inviting me into its world. I can't bear it anymore. Everything inside me started to crumble. I can't differentiate between what is real and what is virtual. That shadow was no longer just an unclear shape. It completely enveloped me, pulling me into another world. I have no sense of time anymore. I don't know how long I stood there, but the shadow continued to move around me, as if it was playing with me. Suddenly, I felt a strange movement in space. Not from the shadow, but from myself. I felt a change in my body, as if I was falling into a different state. The shadow no longer passed over me. It had merged into my body, as if I had become a part of it. I'm not myself anymore. The storm has subsided, but the air inside the house is still stuffy and thick like an invisible curtain, weighing heavily on my body. I felt unable to escape the strange feeling that I was no longer simply in a house. This is another space, a world that I cannot explain, but cannot leave. Every time I tried to push those thoughts out of my head, the whistling sound rang out, a reminder that that presence was still watching me. Part of me wanted to run away, but what I felt deep in my mind wouldn't let me. I have to stay, I have to understand what's going on here. A feeling of numbness ran through my body as I tried to make sense of everything. Surely, perhaps the storm had tired my mind, making me think of things that didn't exist. But no, something is actually happening. I could feel its presence, even if I couldn't see it clearly. With each gust of wind, each distant clap of thunder, my tension increased. I sat there in the living room, the weak light from the single lamp not enough to dispel the darkness around me. A long whistle, gentle but decisive, rang out again. It didn't come from far away, but right outside the front door. My heart was pounding, and I felt like my body was frozen, unable to move. I looked towards the window. Everything was locked, but the door handle still shook slightly, as if someone was standing outside, waiting for me to open the door. It's so cold, I can't breathe. Once again, the whistle sounded, this time accompanied by a light knock, as if someone was gently tapping on the door, one by one, as if testing me, forcing me to react. Cold sweat ran down my temples, my body was so tense that it might have cramps. I tried to reassure myself that it was probably just my imagination, just something I thought up under stress, but I couldn't help but feel that something very real was right there, outside the door. The flashlight in my hand began to flicker, seemingly no longer able to illuminate. I stood up, trying to regain my composure, feeling each heavy step as I approached the door. The whistling sound continued, a strange melody that I couldn't explain. They seemed to react to my fear, accentuating my tension every time I convinced myself I could ignore it. The door could easily be opened, but I wasn't sure I could endure what would happen if I did. I stood there, holding the keys, but my legs couldn't move. Every second passes like a century. The shadow of the warehouse loomed in the flashlight's light, but I couldn't go back there. It's not just a warehouse anymore. It was another force, something that could see me, but I couldn't see it. The whistling suddenly stopped, and everything became silent. I stood still, not daring to move. My heart was pounding in my ears, to the point where I felt like my entire body would burst. The silence was heavy, and I didn't dare open the door. I don't know how long I stood there, but as soon as my flashlight started stuttering and the light began to fade, I made up my mind. I held the key in my hand and opened the back door. Each step seemed to last forever. I quietly snuck out, trying to keep my spirits up as I ran to the truck. The night was still quiet, as if everyone was waiting for me to return, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stand still in that house another moment. When I got into the truck, I was still filled with confusion, as if an invisible force was watching me. I started the car, the engine roared, but it didn't reassure me. My nerves were tense, my body collapsed from fear and exhaustion. I drove away, not paying attention to the work I had left unfinished. However, that strange feeling still followed me. The melody of that whistle still echoes in my head, no matter how many miles I drive. It's not just a sound anymore, it was a sign, something I couldn't escape, couldn't explain. Even though I tried to complete the maintenance work, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that house was still watching me. Even though I drove past rows of ancient trees and through dim roads, the feeling of not being able to escape that house still haunted me. Even though the light from the truck's lights pierced the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, some presence, was still chasing me. It was not a human being, not a distinct creature. It was just a darkness, an undefinable feeling, but I could feel it. The whistling melody still echoes in my head, seemingly everywhere, in every breath I take, in every sound of the wheels rolling on the road. It wasn't the sound from the storm, it wasn't from the wind. It was something else, something too precise and conscious to be just a coincidence. It follows me, wherever I go. My whole body felt like it was tied in an invisible trap. Every time I thought I was free, the sound came again, and I felt myself being pulled back in again, unable to control it. That shadow, or maybe something from the old house, was hovering around me, watching my every move, waiting for me to do something wrong. The space outside the truck was pitch black. The rain still falls heavily, but I can't stop. That feeling, that inexplicable threat, still makes me unable to stop. I kept looking out the rearview mirror, as if hoping I would see something, a figure, some trace that might explain what was happening. I stopped at an intersection, took a deep breath, trying to calm down. But I can't. Even when the truck was silent, when only the sound of rain remained, I still felt that presence lurking in the space around me. This feeling is like being trapped in a silent space where everything is fake, and the only truth is this surveillance. The sky above was still hazy, the dim light of the stars not enough to dispel the enveloping darkness. Suddenly, I heard a small noise behind me. At first I thought it was the sound of rain, but no, it was a light step, not mine. My heart jumped again, my body stiffened. I looked in the rearview mirror, but there was only darkness. Nothing. Something is waiting for me, I know it. Part of me wanted to turn on the car and drive away immediately, but another part urged me to go back to the house, back to the secrets I couldn't decipher. It seemed like the shadow in the old house had reached out to me, pulling me back to face it. As I started moving, the feeling of anxiety and confusion grew stronger. Everything begins to blur, as if there is no end, no clear distinction between reality and fantasy. Dark shadows surrounded me, as if they were moving with my every move. I turned around, but everything was just gloomy silhouettes in the pale light of the car lights. Just when I thought I had escaped, the whistling sound rang out again, but this time, it didn't come from far away. It's right in my head. The melody rang out, clear and steady, as if it were speaking to me, reminding me that I couldn't escape it. My heart sank, and I felt like I was slowly sinking into a deep hole from which I could not escape. Suddenly, I felt a cold wind blowing, so strong that it made my car shake. The shadows in the car seemed to grow thicker and thicker, as if the very air was being tightened. The car's lights began to flicker, and I hastily turned them off, but the air around me remained thick and eerily still. That feeling became heavy, each breath seemed like an effort to maintain life. The whistling continued, but now it was more like a reminder, a wordless question, as if it was asking me if I was ready to face the truth. Suddenly, all the feelings of fear and tension burst out of me. I can't bear it anymore. Everything in me wanted to run away, but part of me couldn't let go of that house. I drove away, not looking back, even though it felt like something was chasing me from behind. I don't know what it is, but I know it's not a coincidence. Someone, or something, is following me, and I can't escape. Every mile I ran, I felt like I was running away from myself, from something invisible. That shadow is still following me. Not a shadow of a person, but an invisible presence, something that followed me from the house, silently, unable to escape. That strange feeling did not leave me. I looked in the rearview mirror, and even though I saw only darkness, I could still feel those eyes, bright eyes, glowing in the darkness, as if shining right at me. There was no sound, but the silence made the feeling even more palpable, as if an invisible force was surrounding me, waiting for me to do something wrong. My whole body tensed up with tension. Every little noise on the street, every wind that passes by, I feel like someone is looking at me, waiting for me to make a wrong step. Memories of that whistle, of that strange shadow, constantly haunt me. That melody kept echoing in my head, so clear and precise that it couldn't be just an imagination. It follows me, steadfastly and unforgivingly. Suddenly, my car suddenly shook, as if something had hit the wheel. I was startled, my body tensed, but when I looked out through the windshield, there was nothing. There was only darkness, rain and cold wind. I was panting, my hands clenched the steering wheel, feeling like my heart was beating non-stop, beyond the capacity of a human body to endure. that feeling becomes more and more clear. I don't have to run away from the shadow of my old house anymore. I was running from something deeper, untouchable, unseeable, but it kept pulling me into a world from which I could not retreat. And the more I ran, the more I felt like I was being pulled into it, like a trap I couldn't escape from. Suddenly, the whistle sounded again, this time not from far away, but from right inside my car. That sound spread throughout the space in the car, dense and clear as if it were right next to me. A cold chill ran down my spine, and I quickly turned to the right, looking in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing but darkness. Just that sound, still echoing in my head, lasting as if it wanted to drive me crazy. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't help but feel that I wasn't alone in this car. There was something right next to me, in the air, in that darkness. It was watching my every breath, waiting for me to do something wrong. A panic shot through me, but I couldn't stop, I couldn't go back to that house. The shadow in the house, the whistle, all seemed to be connecting, like an inextricable vortex. I started seeing strange things on the road. The trees on both sides of the road seemed to bend and twist unnaturally, as if they were guiding me along a predetermined path. Everything no longer seems real. The sky, the ground, everything was distorted. I can't differentiate between what is real and what is virtual. It felt like someone was pulling me out of the car, making it impossible for me to stop anymore. Even though I drove faster, I still felt that shadow quietly following me, constantly chasing me, like a vivid nightmare that I couldn't escape from. As I drove past an intersection, I saw the silhouette of the house again. It stood there, still, but it made me feel like I was back, like I hadn't left. I glanced behind me, and I saw it. It wasn't a house, but a figure, standing there, in the dark, hidden behind the trees. I couldn't see the face clearly, but I felt those eyes, staring at me. Another whistle. This time not in my head, but from right outside the car window, from the left side. I turned around to look, but there was nothing but darkness. A cold wind blew past, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I couldn't help but think that something was getting closer. Immediately, I stepped on the accelerator and left everything behind. The night was still thick, the rain was still falling, but the threat, the feeling of being watched never left me. No matter how far I drove, that feeling still followed me, like a ghost that couldn't be erased. That whistle, like an indelible memory, continues to follow me, lingering in space. I know that, no matter how hard I try to run away, I can never truly escape it. Even though I left the house, even though I drove through every deserted street, the feeling of not being able to escape still stuck with me, like a shadow that never left. The whistle is not just a sound anymore, it has become a part of me, something that cannot be escaped, cannot be removed from my mind. That sound seemed to penetrate every layer of protection, filling the space in my car, making it impossible for me to breathe. Each whistle sounded like a whisper in the quiet space of the car. It came from somewhere, but not outside the car. Not from the outside, but as if it were echoing inside my head, each melody, each note so steady and precise, too conscious to be just a coincidence. I turned to look in the rearview mirror again, and this time, I felt something different. A figure lingered in there, unclear, but distinct. A shadow I couldn't identify, not a person, not an object. It was like an illusion, a part of space, a presence that I couldn't get rid of, no matter how hard I tried to forget it. Every time I thought I was out, it was as if that shadow pulled me back. I can't explain it. Everything in the car started to feel strange. I felt like the space in the small car seemed to shrink, the space around me seemed distorted, as if I was falling into a bottomless pit. Everything became blurry, and I no longer knew where I was. I can't stop. Shadows were hovering outside the glass window, strange shapes that I couldn't identify, they seemed to want to engulf me. I felt like I was moving, but also not moving, as if I were spinning in an endless vortex. There is no way out. Every look, every weak light from the street lights only made me feel strange, increasing my feeling of insecurity. The feeling that I was being watched did not diminish. Every time I looked back, that shadow became clearer and larger, as if it was growing inside me. Am I haunted? Or is that shadow really following me? Suddenly, my car suddenly stopped, not under my control. The wheel made a noise, as if something was blocking it. A cold feeling came over me, and I couldn't understand what was going on. Looking out through the glass door, I realized I was back near the house. But how is that possible? I just drove away. The truth is that I turned around, back to the place I escaped from. That shadow, that whistle, it was like they were taking over my world. I can't leave here. The feeling of that presence is real. It's not my imagination, but something that exists in this space, pulling me back, waiting for me to face it. I opened the car door and got out. The space around me was still quiet, but I could feel the tension in the air. The street lights flickered like weak rays of light in the dense darkness. The sky above me was still black, as if it was about to swallow everything below it. The rain was no longer falling, but I could hear the sound of running water from somewhere in the darkness, like sounds from a faraway place. My footsteps echoed in the quiet space, every step seemed to be being watched. A cold wind suddenly blew past, making me shiver. I felt a change in the air, as if something was moving around me. The whistle sounded again, but this time it wasn't in my head. It came from right behind me, from somewhere in the darkness. I turned around, but there was nothing. There was only darkness and undulating shadows around me. And then, I saw it, that shadow, clearer and larger this time, standing right behind me. The eyes glowed, not natural light but something haunting, dazzling in the darkness. That shadow, or something, was approaching me. It's right here, in this space, standing quietly looking at me, as if waiting for me to speak. Unable to move, I stood there, paralyzed, my eyes glued to the shadow. My heart was pounding, I couldn't breathe, as if the shadow was forcing all the air out of me. Once again, I felt the whistle, but this time it wasn't the only sound. A light tapping sound sounded, as if someone was tapping on my body, on my mind. That presence is all-encompassing. And I realized, it's not a shadow. It's a part of me, a part one can't escape. I was trapped in my own fears, in a world where I couldn't tell the difference between what was real and what wasn't. Time passed, but the feeling of being watched did not diminish. Night after night, as dusk falls and the wind rises, I cannot escape the memories of that strange melody. That whistling sound didn't just stop in my dreams, but it also stuck with me even in my waking moments, when I tried to convince myself that it was just a delusion. But those sounds, those reflections on the glass, made it impossible for me to escape that feeling, the feeling that there was something waiting for me. Every night, I lay on the couch, trying to avoid the light from the dim TV. That light not only made me tired but also made me feel frustrated, as if I couldn't escape the terrifying silence of the house. Images on the screen become dimmer, as if they refuse to shine too brightly for fear of attracting unwanted attention. The feeling of tension inside me is increasing. The surrounding sound seemed muffled by the silence. I kept feeling like there was someone standing outside the window, as if that presence was waiting for me to open the door, waiting for me to venture out and look out. I can't stand that feeling anymore. And then, I saw it. A tall figure, dark and shadowy, moved in the reflection of the glass door leading to the backyard. That shadow doesn't belong to me. It wasn't my image in the glass, but another presence, something I couldn't define, but it was right before my eyes. I stood there, feeling a choking sensation rising in my throat. A cold chill ran down my spine. Cold sweat slowly seeped into my skin as I realized I was truly alone in this darkness, with my own heartbeat as my only companion. That feeling, the shadow in the window, it wasn't just an illusion. It was something that was actually there, waiting for me. But I didn't dare move, didn't dare do anything. I just stood there, my eyes unable to take my eyes off the glass door, as if someone was standing out there, among the chairs scattered in the garden, staring at me. My palms were sweaty as I approached the door. Every step I took, every sound echoed in that silence, creating an indescribable feeling. When I pressed my face against the cold glass door, I only saw my own reflection, but something had changed. The darkness behind me, in the garden, felt deeper. It wasn't just darkness, it was something else, something I couldn't name. I can't get rid of that feeling. I stood there, my eyes never leaving the glass window, trying to scan every dark corner of the garden. But I only saw chairs motionless and leaves shaking in the cold wind. I smiled to myself, feeling silly as I examined what I thought was a silhouette. But I still couldn't get rid of that feeling, the feeling that something was standing right outside the door, quietly watching me. I locked the door, pulled the curtains and tried to convince myself that at least that shadow wouldn't be able to get in. I returned to the couch, trying to flip through the TV channels, but the image on the screen was so blurry that it couldn't make me forget that feeling. The low flicker from the TV speakers seemed to blend into the heavy silence of the room, as if everything in the house was holding its breath. But then, when I looked at the glass again, I realized I was expecting something, expecting to see that shadow, to see someone pressing against the glass. A strange feeling of fear rose within me. I don't dare turn on the light, because I know the light can make me see more clearly what I fear most. Part of me wanted to get up and turn on the light, but another part stopped me, afraid that if I did, I would see something inexplicable. That feeling, that presence beyond the window, never goes away. It's still there, waiting. And I know, no matter what I do, no matter how much I turn away, I can't escape it. I couldn't stop, I couldn't retreat, even though I knew that the more I tried to run away, the deeper I would sink into the invisible threat that was surrounding me. That shadow, that melody, those strange sounds kept echoing in my head, making me unable to sleep, unable to rest, unable to think of any logical reason for what was happening. An unrecognizable presence, something invisible but powerful, always following me from behind, always calling me, pulling me into an endless nightmare. Every night, as dusk falls and the wind begins to blow, I feel something change in the air. Something almost imperceptible, but so distinct that it made me look around, checking every corner of the house, as if afraid that something had moved into my space without my knowledge. Tonight was no different. I sat in the living room, the TV was still blurry, the image on the screen wasn't enough to make me forget what was going on in my head. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room changed. I can't describe that feeling. It was like a sudden cold wind blowing, but not from the window or door. It came from the space around me, from dark corners that I couldn't see, as if the walls and objects in the room had begun to change and move in a strange way. The light from the TV was dim, not enough to dispel the darkness, and the blurry images no longer made me feel safe. I looked around, feeling like something was looking at me from hidden corners in the room, from behind chairs, from the thick darkness behind me. I didn't dare turn around, didn't dare look into those dark corners. I feel like I'm trapped in this very space, where everything can change, where what I know about reality can be completely distorted. The whistling continued, endlessly, as if it was waiting for a response from me. The notes lingered, like an invitation, an irresistible provocation. I wanted to escape, but every time I tried to do so, it became stronger, as if I was being sucked into a bottomless pit. My mind became hazy, as if my thoughts were being torn apart, every sound, every movement around me made me feel less like myself. A sudden noise from outside startled me. It was a light knock on the door, one by one, as if someone was testing me, waiting for me to open the door, waiting for me to face it. My heart was pounding, I sat still, not daring to move. I tried looking through the window, but saw nothing but darkness. My sense of fear increased again, a presence I couldn't identify was standing right outside the door, and I couldn't escape that feeling. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I turned around, but there was no one. That cold was not from the wind, not from the air, but something deeper, an indescribable feeling. I felt a presence, a threat creeping through every corner of the house. But I can't run. I couldn't do anything but sit there, feeling my every breath. Each breath seemed to become difficult, as if I was being forced to breathe in a narrow space, where the air was gradually running out. That shadow is still there, out there, quietly waiting, ready to step in when I'm weak. My eyes stared at the window, and this time, I saw something strange. A faint figure, standing right outside the yard. It was a shadow, not a person, but had the appearance of a person. It didn't move, but I knew it was waiting for me. An unbearable feeling rose within me, as if the shadow was not just waiting for me to open the door, but was challenging me, daring me to face what I had been trying to avoid. I stood up and walked towards the door, but when I put my hand on the door handle, I felt a strong push from the outside, as if someone was pulling the door from the outside, not letting me out. I tugged on the door handle, but it wouldn't open. The door seemed to be held tightly by an invisible force. I took a deep breath, trying to regain composure, but at that moment I knew I could no longer escape that shadow. Every little noise in the house is like a warning bell. The feeling that there was a presence out there, waiting for me, became unbearable. I couldn't shake the thought that that shadow was still somewhere, watching me, like a shadow, impossible to catch, impossible to see clearly, but always present, always hovering in the house. I stood there, in the dark, my heart racing. My lips were dry, my hands clutched the stair handrail tightly. Every step I take makes me feel like someone is following my steps, watching my every move. I wanted to go back to the bedroom, I wanted to close the door and try to sleep. But I know that feeling will never let me go. Once again, the crunching sound came out. This time, I cannot be mistaken. It came from below, from the back door, the place I used to keep tightly closed. Every sound, every movement made my heart feel like it was about to burst. I stood still, not daring to breathe, trying to regain my composure to see if I really heard the noise or if it was just my imagination. But no, that voice wasn't in my head. It's real. It's clear. Something was moving below, touching the door, trying to get in. I looked in the mirror hanging on the wall, and I saw my reflection. My eyes, now incredibly wide, looked back at me, like a cornered animal. My hair stood on end, and I could clearly feel the panic rising in every fiber of my being. That shadow, the image I thought had disappeared, reappeared in my mind, and I couldn't escape it. I no longer had the courage to stay in the room anymore. An irresistible urge made me get out of bed and walk down the hallway, even though I knew things could get worse. I told myself I was just tired, just paranoid from exhaustion. But what I felt was nothing like an illusion. As I walked down the stairs, the floorboards beneath my feet made a small hissing noise, as if warning me of something lurking in the darkness. I held my breath, trying to walk gently, but every step felt like I was being watched, like someone was watching me from the dark. I felt that shadow, that presence, waiting for me to come down, watching my every move, every breath I took. Something inside me urged me to face it, to open my eyes, to see clearly what was waiting for me in the darkness. But part of me can't. I stood in front of the living room, and this time, the shadow I saw in the glass window was not my own reflection. It's not me. It was a tall, dark, shadowy figure, standing there, in the darkness, with only eyes as bright as fire, watching me. The weak light from the television screen shines on the walls, causing ghosts to pass by. It felt like there was some force, invisible but present everywhere, waiting for me. I can't stop, I can't turn away. That shadow was still standing there, quietly looking at me from behind. Once again, I was caught between fear and curiosity. I couldn't believe what I saw, but I couldn't deny the feeling. My heart beat violently, I felt the tension and stuffiness in the space around me. Suddenly, I heard a small noise, the sound of something scraping against the back door. It's not the wind, it's not the swaying trees. It was a rubbing sound, clear and real. I cannot be mistaken. A feeling of fear rose inside me. I wanted to go back to the bedroom and close the door, but I couldn't leave here. I can't run away, because I know, no matter what I do, that shadow will always be there, still waiting for me. This invisible threat does not allow me to hide. I walked toward the back door, my palms sweaty, my body tense as if ready for something terrible. I didn't dare open the door, but I knew it couldn't be avoided anymore. As I turned the doorknob, the sound came again, this time from behind me. A long whistle, as if hinting at something inevitable. The feeling of fear clung to me. That shadow, that invisible presence, still lingered around me, as if challenging me to face a truth I couldn't explain. I couldn't shake that feeling, a feeling that I couldn't name, but that took over me from the inside out. I still stood there, cold sweat drenched my body, my hands clutching the curtains tightly, as if afraid that one wrong move would cause everything to explode. When I pulled back the curtain, I no longer saw peace in the yard. Even though it was empty, I felt like something was watching me through the still breeze. The light from the street lamp was not enough to illuminate the whole space, and I clearly saw the ripples on the glass, as if there was something that was not a reflection of light, but a strange physical phenomenon. It felt like a wave of darkness, invading everything, making it impossible for me to see clearly. I stood there, unable to breathe, unable to move, for a long moment. When I looked at my own reflection in the glass, my face distorted. The eyes were wide open, the mouth slightly open, and I could clearly see the terror. Those images were not me, they were part of the darkness, part of the presence that had taken over me. I felt a numbness in my body, as if I couldn't move, couldn't leave. And then, in that moment, I realized, that shadow wasn't just standing outside in the yard. It was in the house, in my reflection. It's inside me. A strange, twisted presence suddenly took over the space around me. My hands trembled when I felt it. At this moment, there was not just a shadow in the room, but everything I knew about reality was being ripped apart. Suddenly, I heard a small noise, like a light rubbing sound on the back door. My heart beat strongly. This time, I can't be indifferent anymore. I turned around, and that image, that tall shadow, appeared again, blurry but clear. I can't differentiate between what is real and what is virtual. I can't tell the difference anymore. Everything seems to be merging into an unknown flow. My reflection was still there, but I realized that I couldn't face it anymore. That shadow was standing right behind me, waiting for me to open the door, waiting for me to face what I didn't want to see. My palms were sweaty, and I felt a wave of nausea spread through my body. Every movement, every breath becomes heavier. I stepped back, not daring to look at that reflection anymore. But I can't run away. Every step I took, I felt that shadow following me, as if it had become a part of me, an inseparable part. I can't escape it, I can't leave it. Somehow, I tried to restore calm, to prove to myself that everything I felt was caused by my paranoia. I decided to check every corner of the house, to prove that there were no intruders, nothing threatening me. But as I walked through the hallway, as I checked the windows and door locks, I felt a deadlock, as if everything was locked shut. Those noises are not wind, not fatigue. They were an intrusion, something waiting for me. That feeling didn't just stop at the sound, but penetrated into my space, into every corner of my mind. I couldn't escape, and I realized that I was trapped in my own fear. I checked everything, really checked everything thoroughly, but no matter what, I still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That shadow, that strange presence, kept lingering in my space. Every detail, every small movement in the house makes me feel like someone is right there, closer to me than I thought. I couldn't shake the feeling that, if I looked through the glass again, would see it, the tall figure standing behind me, just one more step away from reaching me. I decided that maybe I needed to stop, forget everything for a while, and rest. But as soon as I turned off the TV and the light dimmed, I felt an overwhelming sense of fear. At that time, I just wanted to go upstairs and hide in the bedroom, where I could feel safer. But I know, the more I stay away from it, the more that feeling increases, as if someone is watching my every move. With each step, I felt heavier and heavier. My breathing was rapid, and my body trembled with fatigue and anxiety. When I got to the bedroom, I quickly locked the door, telling myself that I was okay for now. But sleep did not come. I lay there, in the dark, feeling the tension still weighing heavily on my chest. Unable to sleep, I thought I was too tired, but that feeling still wouldn't let go. As the light of dawn entered the room through the curtains, some of my fear eased, but a feeling of tension remained. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself that it was just fatigue and lack of sleep, a part of me still felt like something was lurking somewhere in the house. Even though there were no obvious signs of an intruder, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else existed in this space, something invisible but extremely terrifying. I checked the living room again in the daylight. The glass door was no longer wavy, no longer distorted, and the backyard looked normal and quiet. But the feeling of being watched remains. I kept thinking that if I looked closely at the garden chairs, would see it, that shadow, standing right out there, looking at me. Even though I couldn't see anything, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that there was a piece of that shadow still somewhere in my vision. The memory of that tall shadow stuck with me, and I couldn't get rid of it. The image of the shadow, reflected in the glass, was vivid in me again like an unfinished nightmare. I wanted to believe that I imagined everything, but my heart was still beating fast, my breathing was rapid. Everything around me seemed to be torn apart, becoming a haunting broken picture. I can't calm down anymore. Something inside me wouldn't let me give up finding out the truth. I stood in front of the glass door again, my hands shaking as I grasped the doorknob, and I looked at my reflection in the glass again. My eyes were tired and pale, I could feel the tension in every breath. But this time, I decided not to run away anymore. Stepping closer, I looked at my reflection, but at that moment, I saw it. That shadow, tall and shadowy, stood behind me, as if waiting for me to return. Everything around me seemed to stop. That shadow still stood there, dim in the amber light, like a part of me, inseparable. And then, I realized that I couldn't escape it. No matter what I try, that shadow is always there, inside me, in this house, unable to escape. It is not an external presence, but a part of me, a part of this world, that I cannot explain. Fear took over me completely. I cannot fight it. And in that moment, I realized I couldn't run away anymore. I was trapped in my own darkness. I can't stop. That shadow, that strange presence still does not let me go. With every step I take, I feel it more clearly, closer. The more I tried to stay away, the more I felt it weighing on me. It is not something that can be seen, but it is present everywhere, in every breath I take, in every step I take. Even though I thought I was tired, that I was just an exhausted man, my mind couldn't rest. When I turned to look at my reflection in the glass, I realized that the shadow was not just there, but a part of me. It blends into me, across my thoughts, like an illusion that I can't get rid of. I don't feel like myself anymore. The reflections weren't just repetitions, but something blurry and distorted, as if everything I'd ever known about myself was being torn apart. I tried to get out of there, away from the glass, but my feet were frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't walk. The feeling that that shadow, not just a shadowy shape, but a real presence, became increasingly clear. I can't differentiate between what is real and what is virtual. Any movements I made became skewed reflexes, as if I were living in a world with no more rules. The clock in the house occasionally rang, but every sound became faint and unimportant. Every second passes like incoming waves, uncontrollable. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I want to leave this house, but I can't do it. Everything seemed frozen, and I was left with only fear, with seemingly no way out. This time, I decided to check again. I can't live with this worry anymore. I walked down the stairs, feeling like each step was pulling me deeper into a hole. The air around me was cold. Every step caused strange noises from the floorboards, making me even more nervous. That shadow, no matter where I looked, was still there, silently watching me. I walked into the living room, and this time, I looked at the glass door. I know I cannot avoid it. Can't run away. That feeling, something between this world and another world, began to take over me. Not just an invisible fear, but a real threat. That shadow is not just a reflection, but something that can be felt, that can penetrate this space. My palms were wet, I couldn't breathe, my body felt paralyzed. My eyes stared at the door, trying to find a reasonable reason, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. But at that moment, I saw it again. That shadow, standing right outside the door. It was not a person, not an object, but a presence, absolute darkness. I stood there, unable to move, unable to do anything but look at it. My eyes opened wide, but I couldn't take my eyes off that shadow. Everything around me started to blur, as if this room was no longer real. There was no more light, no more darkness, just that shadow and me, in a space from which there was no escape. With each passing second, I felt like I was falling into darkness, like I was being pulled into another world, a world I couldn't understand. That shadow is not something I can explain. It was part of something I couldn't reach, something that was changing my reality, step by step, moment by moment. I backed away, but it was still there. No matter where I run, no matter what I do, I can't escape it. And part of me realized that I couldn't escape myself. The weak light from my flashlight only illuminated a small portion of the campsite. I stopped, not daring to move forward, feeling unable to escape this fear. The shadow still followed me, clinging to my every step, as if wanting me to turn around and face it. Night is no longer a time of rest, but a never-ending battle, between me and something invisible and inexplicable. I looked through the flashlight, looking for any trace, but there was nothing. Everything remained quiet. But that feeling, that presence that I couldn't understand, kept making me feel like I was being watched, as if there was an eye watching me from behind. I turned around, but saw only empty tents, darkness, and trees swaying gently in the blowing wind. There was no sign that anyone was nearby. I continued on to my friend's tent, who had returned before I closed the door. But as I approached, I felt a strange coldness. Something's not right. I can't explain it, but there's something strange about the air around me. My flashlight illuminated the surrounding chairs and camp items, but I still felt that something was left unsaid. That shadow, or some presence, is still lurking somewhere, not yet fully visible. I entered my friend's tent, but there was no one there. No answer. A feeling of tension rose within me. I started calling his name, but everything remained silent. There was no reply. I started to feel worried, but part of me also didn't want to face something I couldn't understand. I stood there, not knowing what to do. Why wasn't he in his tent? Why are there no traces? The sound of grass rustling in the night and the wind blowing through the pine trees made me shiver. The atmosphere in the campsite became heavy, filled with tension. Suddenly, I saw him standing there, next to the tent, holding a metal cup, as if nothing had happened. He stood there like a ghost, saying nothing, not looking worried at all. I couldn't believe my eyes. He should have been in the tent, but he was standing here, as if nothing had happened. Cold sweat poured down my back. The feeling of suffocation made it almost impossible for me to breathe. He didn't seem panicked, but I knew I just had a vivid nightmare. He was confused but determined that I was just dreaming. How is this possible? I saw his tent empty. I heard sounds in the night. I felt a change in the space, as if someone or something had left, leaving an uneasy, gloomy feeling. We checked the surrounding area, but there were no traces other than our own footprints. No one broke in, no sign of change. However, that feeling, something invisible but present, still follows us. I can't explain why, but there's no denying that something strange is happening. The morning passed in tense silence. Everything seemed normal, but in my mind, everything was wrong. The feeling that there was an invisible presence still lingered in my head. Every sound from my surroundings became a reminder that I was no longer safe. Every little noise, every movement in the darkness made me think that something was lurking near me. We ate a quick meal in silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a ghost waiting for me. Every gust of wind, every rustle in the pine trees makes me feel like I'm not the only one in the campsite. I tasted iron in my mouth, as if everything was being suppressed, and I knew something was about to happen. Once again, I opened the tent door, my hands shaking as I looked out. The sky was dark, there was no moonlight. I held out my flashlight, scanning our campsite. That feeling flared up again, as if something was watching me, waiting for me to keep moving. I cannot escape it. I can't escape these strange feelings. Again, I didn't know what I was facing, but I felt that it was very close. With every step I take, I feel like I'm entering another space where everything can change with just one move. I couldn't shake the feeling that something invisible was creeping in the darkness around me, waiting for me to face it. The smallest sounds, the ripples on the ground, all seemed to have a deep meaning that I couldn't understand. The inexplicable appearance of a faint light on the stone wall outside made me feel even more panicked. The beam of light moved slowly, not like the light of a normal lamp, but like something trying to communicate, as if there was an outside presence trying to reach me. Every beat of my heart was pounding in my ears, and my anxiety grew. I blinked rapidly to adjust my eyes, trying to find a logical reason for this strange occurrence. But it's not possible. Everything became even more blurry, as if the darkness not only surrounded me but also absorbed the light. I felt like I was being swallowed up in a space with no way out. The beam of light flickers, moving slowly across the rock surface. The quiet, the loneliness of the campsite didn't help me feel any safer. Every time I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just another camper, I felt like the invisible shadow was overwhelming all of my senses. The feeling that something was silently watching me, waiting for me, became all too clear. That shadow, that presence, seems to be more than just a vague image but has become a part of me, in this space, in this life. Every rustle of fabric, every gust of wind is like a warning. Every little sound, every little movement becomes part of that obsession. I tried to control myself, but I couldn't. When I close my eyes, I still see blurry images, feeling unable to shake off that shadow. I stood there, unable to move, unable to escape, as if I were trapped in an incomprehensible vortex of gloom. When I open my eyes in the morning, I still feel that feeling, the tension, the anxiety, and the fear. But there was no trace. The shadow is no longer present, but it is still somewhere, in my thoughts, in my every step. I can't get rid of it, I can't make it go away. What I experienced was not just a figment of my imagination, but part of something bigger, scarier, that I couldn't explain. Everything in me was changed forever. And even though I could tell myself that it was all just because I was tired, from lack of sleep, part of me knew that I couldn't live like I used to anymore. I still stood there, in silence, listening to the rustling wind and noises from outside. I don't know how much longer I can resist this obsession. But I know, that shadow is still here, and I can't escape it. The fear didn't stop after I left the canyon. When I looked back at the massive stone walls, the sunlight had changed them to a bright yellow, looking inviting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something lurked in those shadows. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself that I had left the dangerous area, that fear still wouldn't let me go. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that faint light, a light crawling along the rock face, an inexplicable image, something out of this world. I can't forget that feeling. No matter how far I drove away from the campground, the feeling of being watched stuck with me, still lurking in the back of my mind. The questions kept swirling, weighing on me. What did I really witness? Did I imagine everything? Or is there really something out there waiting? These questions have no answers. And every night, when I tried to sleep, I would see that light flitting across the edges of my vision, once again drawing me into the nightmare. The dark and quiet night, with the sound of wind rustling through the trees, only seemed to make me feel more alone and vulnerable. I remember that feeling, when a part of me didn't dare look into the darkness, and every time I opened my eyes I was face to face with that invisible shadow, waiting. Sometimes I think I've gotten rid of the fear, but then it comes back, with the image of faint light, dancing on the stone wall. It was a presence, something I couldn't name, but I felt it clearly. And even though I tried to run away, I knew that I couldn't escape that shadow, couldn't escape something that was secretly waiting out there. As the days passed, I continued with my life, but every night, I felt like I was being watched. Every time I close my eyes, I find I can't escape that feeling. And at every quiet moment, I heard rustling sounds, sudden gusts of wind, as if something was moving stealthily around me. I couldn't know, but I felt that shadow was always there, out of my sight, but still existing, still waiting. Every time I go to sleep, my heart is pounding. The nightmares were relentless, and when I woke up, I felt like there was a presence out there waiting for me. I couldn't understand it, but I knew I couldn't run away from it. It will always be there, on the canyon wall, waiting for someone to dare to face it, but never leave a trace. And in my moments of sanity, I realized that there are things in this life, mysteries, that do not always need to be decoded. Sometimes, things are best left unexplored, undigested. I can't explain what I witnessed, and I'm not sure if I can live with it, but I know that shadow is still waiting for me, somewhere, in the invisible shadows. The air around me gradually became heavy, as if a storm was coming, but there was no wind, no rain, no thunder. There was only an immense silence covering everything, making the space feel compressed. Every little noise, every invisible movement created a feeling of insecurity that I couldn't explain. I had come here, intending just to experience a simple fishing trip, an escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, but now, I felt like I had entered another world, where fear and loneliness became constant watchers. When I pitched the tent near the large rocks, the surrounding air suddenly calmed down. All sounds around seemed to be silent, no more birds singing, no more wind rustling through the trees. There was only a cold stillness, as if nothing alive existed in this area other than me. I tried to dispel the feeling of insecurity by lighting a small fire. The fire burned brightly, the crackling sound of branches breaking as the only comfort in the dense darkness that was encroaching around me. However, silence could not ease the feeling of being watched. Strange noises and vague sounds coming from behind the tent made me unable to help but pay attention. Every step, every movement in the darkness was as if a pair of invisible eyes were watching me. At first, I thought it was just some animal, but when the noise began to have a rhythm, I couldn't help but feel that it was a deliberate presence. Someone, or maybe something, was moving around my tent. Slow, steady steps, like someone was studying me, not the steps of an animal. A feeling of anxiety rose within me. My mind raced between calling out to scare off the intruder and the paralyzing fear that kept me from doing anything. I lay there, tense, every muscle in my body tensed, unable to stop. Even though I didn't hear the sound clearly, that feeling of presence, of an invisible yet omnipresent presence, still stuck with me. The footsteps were slow, circling the campsite, forming an endless circle around me, as if it were controlling this space, waiting for the right moment. I couldn't go back to sleep. I lay still in my sleeping bag, but the tension kept my mind from resting. I could clearly feel that presence, even though it had no clear shape, even though I couldn't see it. But that feeling, like the darkness was swallowing me, it was approaching, quietly, waiting. Finally, I decided to get out of the tent to check it out. Surely it would be nothing, I just imagined it all. But when I walked outside and got closer to where I heard the noise, I couldn't find anything. The rocks were still there, the water was still, there was no trace of footsteps or intrusion. Everything remains the same. But I cannot rest assured. The darkness still lingered in my head, as if something inexplicable was waiting for me, still existing in this space. I tried to convince myself that it was all due to loneliness, due to fatigue, but I couldn't dispel that feeling. Vague images of that presence continued to haunt me, as if the darkness had seeped into me, changing me. I felt like an invisible presence was surrounding me, something was watching me from the shadows just out of sight. As the sky started to lighten, I decided to unzip the tent and check around. New footprints on the wet ground sent chills down my spine. They were not the footprints of an ordinary hiker or a hunter passing by, but heavy footprints, carrying a strange sense of invasion. Those footprints had no clear direction, just rotating around my tent as if someone was intentionally causing fear, following me on purpose. I bent down to examine the footprints. They were clear, deep, and fresh, and could not have been from this morning. They must have been created last night. Heavy footsteps, as if carrying a heavy object, circled the tent, approaching the place where I slept. Cold sweat began to trickle down my forehead as I realized that these footprints were too close, and there was no reason to have them here. I want to leave immediately, pack my things and get out of here. But a part of me, a resilient and curious part, decided to follow in those footsteps. I followed them a short distance into the bush, cold sweat still running down my spine as I stepped over each rock and bush. The footprints led me into the dense forest, but after a while, they suddenly disappeared, no trace of my next step. This feeling of unreality began to spread, as if I was living in an inexplicable nightmare. They disappeared without leaving a trace. I can't understand. Part of me wanted to search further, but the other part of me wanted to leave immediately, feeling like something was wrong, inexplicable. I decided to stay another night, partly because I didn't want fear to dictate my actions, but partly because I couldn't let go of this curiosity. What's going on here? The whole day, I couldn't relax. Sunlight shines on the river surface, but the feeling of insecurity cannot be extinguished. I thought I saw shapes moving among the trees just out of sight, but every time I turned around, there was nothing but trees and darkness. A moment later, I heard a whistle, a low, melodious whistle, echoing through the empty forest. At first I thought I had just misheard, but the whistle did not repeat, and no one appeared. As the light began to fade and clouds gathered in the sky, I felt the tension in the air again, as if something was waiting for me, watching me. Night had come and I tried to quell all my worries by rebuilding a campfire, but even as the flames roared, I couldn't shake the feeling of a presence out there. Every sound around became strange and seemed to increase the tension. The atmosphere tonight was different, heavy and cold. Every whistle of the wind, every small movement of the fire, made me feel as if invisible eyes were watching me. I can't help but feel that something is waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I felt like the darkness itself had eroded the space around me, weighing heavily on my every breath. Throughout the night, I couldn't escape that feeling. When the darkness covers me, I don't know if I'm still living in reality or not. What I witnessed that day still sticks with me, like a nightmare with no end. And every time I close my eyes, I see images of footprints, of invisible shadows, quietly waiting. I felt like an invisible presence was surrounding me, something was watching me from the shadows just out of sight. As the sky started to lighten, I decided to unzip the tent and check around. New footprints on the wet ground sent chills down my spine. They were not the footprints of an ordinary hiker or a hunter passing by, but heavy footprints, carrying a strange sense of invasion. Those footprints had no clear direction, just rotating around my tent as if someone was intentionally causing fear, following me on purpose. I bent down to examine the footprints. They were clear, deep, and fresh, and could not have been from this morning. They must have been created last night. Heavy footsteps, as if carrying a heavy object, circled the tent, approaching the place where I slept. Cold sweat began to trickle down my forehead as I realized that these footprints were too close, and there was no reason to have them here. I want to leave immediately, pack my things and get out of here. But a part of me, a resilient and curious part, decided to follow in those footsteps. I followed them a short distance into the bush, cold sweat still running down my spine as I stepped over each rock and bush. The footprints led me into the dense forest, but after a while, they suddenly disappeared, no trace of my next step. This feeling of unreality began to spread, as if I was living in an inexplicable nightmare. They disappeared without leaving a trace. I can't understand. Part of me wanted to search further, but the other part of me wanted to leave immediately, feeling like something was wrong, inexplicable. I decided to stay another night, partly because I didn't want fear to dictate my actions, but partly because I couldn't let go of this curiosity. What's going on here? The whole day, I couldn't relax. Sunlight shines on the river surface, but the feeling of insecurity cannot be extinguished. I thought I saw shapes moving among the trees just out of sight, but every time I turned around, there was nothing but trees and darkness. A moment later, I heard a whistle, a low, melodious whistle, echoing through the empty forest. At first I thought I had just misheard, but the whistle did not repeat, and no one appeared. As the light began to fade and clouds gathered in the sky, I felt the tension in the air again, as if something was waiting for me, watching me. Night had come and I tried to quell all my worries by rebuilding a campfire, but even as the flames roared, I couldn't shake the feeling of a presence out there. Every sound around became strange and seemed to increase the tension. The atmosphere tonight was different, heavy and cold. Every whistle of the wind, every small movement of the fire, made me feel as if invisible eyes were watching me. I can't help but feel that something is waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I felt like the darkness itself had eroded the space around me, weighing heavily on my every breath. Throughout the night, I couldn't escape that feeling. When the darkness covers me, I don't know if I'm still living in reality or not. What I witnessed that day still sticks with me, like a nightmare with no end. And every time I close my eyes, I see images of footprints, of invisible shadows, quietly waiting. I told myself I was lucky to have escaped before things got worse, but an uneasy feeling about escape kept lingering in my mind. Several days have passed, but my muscles are still tense, and the feeling of insecurity still haunts me. My dreams are no longer peaceful anymore. When I confided in a friend, he suggested it might just be a stranger wandering in the woods, or perhaps a trick of the mind, born of isolation and lack of sleep. He tried to reassure me that there was nothing in that forest that could really hurt me. I nodded in agreement, but I still couldn't dispel that feeling. I knew I had experienced something more than a coincidence. The feeling in my body, the feeling of terror, remained. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of those footprints lingered in my mind, footprints, not of an ordinary person but of an invisible presence, following me. Those steps, slow, purposeful, still repeat in my dreams. And the sound of tree branches snapping in the dark still gives me chills. No matter how much I tried to explain everything away as stress-induced paranoia, somewhere in the depths of my mind, I was certain that something was watching me, that an invisible presence was lurking in the shadows, just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Even though I left that campsite physically unscathed, a part of me remained trapped in that forest, with inexplicable footprints. Even when I returned home, I couldn't completely shake off the feeling of being watched. I started checking the door locks, looking through the curtains, and even under the bed to see if there were any footprints, but it was all just a loop of inexplicable unease. My heart couldn't rest, and no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that I was imagining it, in quiet moments I still felt that presence, something hovering outside my window, always waiting. I could pretend that this was just a harmless encounter with a stranger, but deep in my heart, I knew this wasn't someone lost in the woods. It was like an unknown force, something silent, was trying to infiltrate my life, controlling and manipulating my fear. When I entered that abandoned industrial building, I knew that the atmosphere around was different. Even though my job was to inspect beams and pipes, As soon as I entered, I felt like I was trespassing into a space that was never intended to be disturbed. Sunlight streamed through the cracked windows, but they remained faint, as if the building was swallowing all the light before it could reach my eyes. An imperceptible vibration, like the beating of a heart, could be felt on the ground, making it impossible for me to continue working normally. Every step I took through the building felt heavy, and I began to feel cold sweat roll down my forehead, though I couldn't explain why. I was sent here to inspect the structure, but I feel like I'm caught in a nightmare with no way out. The silence around me grew thicker and thicker, and I couldn't escape the feeling that something was waiting for me in the dark corner of this building. I told myself I had to keep working, but the tension in my body refused to relax. All sense of security, of getting things done, is now shattered in this space. I couldn't take it anymore, and for a moment I couldn't control myself. I turned around and ran out, seemingly unable to breathe. When I entered the area converted into a warehouse, I constantly felt a strangeness in the air. That feeling evokes something heavy, an underground life in this old building, as if this place is more than just a concrete and steel structure. At each step, I felt a slight vibration, as if an invisible force was making the building vibrate, transmitted to my hand through the steel door. It was an unknown sound, a low vibration but enough to make me feel the presence of something I couldn't understand. My hand touched the surface of the door, and I felt a slight buzz, a current of energy passing through my body like an alarm. I stopped and tried to analyze whether I was worrying too much or not. However, there is no denying that that feeling of discomfort only increases. As I walked downstairs, I couldn't help but notice the obvious signs of deterioration. My flashlight illuminated the corroded pipes and rusted walkways, the thick cobwebs covering the steel columns. The air was heavy with the smell of old machinery and made me feel like I was in another world, an abandoned space, dark and lifeless. Although I tried to convince myself that those noises were just normal for abandoned buildings, the irregular shaking, not caused by any machinery or equipment, made me uneasy. Each time it vibrates, it comes like an underground wave, like this building is breathing, moving constantly, and I cannot determine the source of this shaking. When the second day arrived, I returned, determined to explore further, although the feeling of unease did not leave me. The sky this morning was a foggy gray, adding a heavy atmosphere as I stepped inside. My boots touched the concrete, each step seemed to echo in the quiet space, as if something was listening to my every move. The wind whistling through the broken windows above was the rare sound that broke the silence, but below my feet, there was a strange hum, as if something was coming from deep below. My steps began to falter as the metal beneath my feet continued to vibrate. Unable to escape the feeling that an invisible presence was watching my every move, I continued into narrow, winding hallways where ducts and power lines had been drained. Old dashboards, rotting walls, everything around feels like a play of memories, an untold story. As I moved further, the vibration started again, stronger this time, as if there was a slight earthquake under my feet. My heart pounded loudly in my chest, and my body began to tremble, cold sweat pouring down. It felt like these walls were reacting to my presence, as if something underground was shifting. When I found an old console, this vibration became more intense, to the point where I could barely stand. The metal beneath my feet vibrated, as if the entire structure was straining and about to collapse. I almost lost control when the flashlight in my hand fell, and in that moment of panic, the hallway around me seemed to transform into something alive, as if the walls were trying to close in, around me. When I took back the flashlight and continued to investigate, I couldn't deny that there was something invisible, some force in this building that was waiting for me, watching me from the darkness. Even though I couldn't see anything clearly, the feeling that something was shifting, shaking the ground beneath me, was inexplicable. In the following days, my confusion continued to increase. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from underneath the building. Even though I tried to explain the reason for those vibrations, trying to find logic in the strange events that had occurred, fear constantly overwhelmed me. The last time I chatted with the property owners, they mentioned strange folk tales associated with this building, about workers who left due to unexplained events. I considered them superstitious stories, but now, in the silence of this abandoned industrial park, those words returned to my mind, with a weight that could not be ignored. Despite using all the modern measuring equipment such as ground-penetrating sensors, moisture detectors, and listening devices, I still could not find a reasonable reason for these vibrations. Every night, I returned to the hotel, my body tense and shaking with adrenaline, trying to convey what I had experienced in my progress reports. But even technical terms cannot express the fear that gripped me as I stood in the dark hallways of that building. It felt like something giant was coming to life underground and I was standing right above it, as if this building was not just a physical structure but a living organism. My colleague remained skeptical, suggesting that perhaps the building was located on an old geological fault line or that there was some local geological shift causing the vibrations. Even though they tried to reassure me, I couldn't dispel that inexplicable feeling. One of the superiors mentioned in the email that if I cannot find the cause of these vibrations, the client may abandon the project. Although I felt a sense of relief at the idea of being able to leave that building, I felt frustrated at not having a clear understanding of what was going on. The day of the final inspection arrived, and I entered the building with an inescapable sense of dread. The sky that day was overcast, the light was obscured by thick clouds, making the atmosphere even more stuffy. I went downstairs, where I had heard strange noises before. This time, the vibrations were no longer a short jolt, but started at a low frequency, hummed for a few seconds and gradually increased. The metal bars above my head began to vibrate, the echoing noise making my stomach churn. I held my breath, trying to determine the source of these vibrations. I entered a large room where I saw a part of the wall that didn't look right. A patch of brick and concrete that doesn't look like the rest of the wall. The bricks were laid hastily and unevenly, creating large cracks on the surface. The unmistakable feeling that something was wrong, I felt a strong urge to examine more closely. I pressed my hand against the wall, feeling the faint heartbeat from behind. A strange rhythm, as if something was breathing inside this wall. My heart pounded as I took a small hammer from my tool bag and gently tapped the bricks. The sound from behind made me tremble, and I worked hastily, prying a loose brick until it fell to the ground. The darkness behind the opening was too narrow for me to see clearly, but when I shined my flashlight inside, I discovered an empty space. Dim light shined through, glistening a metallic object but with an organic glow, like something alive. Its surface was almost wet, and there was a gentle vibration coming from the object, as if it was waiting for something. The feeling of restlessness still did not let me go. Strange vibrations and unexplained noises persisted in my mind, as if a part of me was still trapped there, in the dark underground room. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of those strange markings flashed before my eyes, the vibration of the structure still echoing in the air like a constant warning. After leaving the abandoned building, I tried to continue my life, working with other customers, but the memory of those strange vibrations still haunted me. I tried to explain everything rationally. Maybe it was just the vibrations of the old structure or the sounds made by old machinery. But the truth is, I can't escape the feeling that something unusual is lurking under that building. When I came home late one evening, my car suddenly vibrated, a familiar vibration, strong but invisible, like what I had felt in that building. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my eyes wide open, looking in the rearview mirror at the darkness, and I couldn't escape the feeling that it was still there, still watching me. An old friend, Aker, once warned me about the isolation in that area. He talked about the storms and the terrifying isolation of the place. When I arrived at the cabin he pointed to, I felt a strange, heavy silence, as if this place was hiding a secret that I couldn't understand. The cabin is simple, a wooden table, old bookshelves, a few basic instructions on fire, water, and electricity. However, the surrounding atmosphere made me feel an indescribable fear, like I was entering a space that did not belong to me. Sitting in the cabin, I heard eerie sounds from outside, the rustling of pine branches and the sound of wood as it expanded and contracted. Something was definitely not right. I felt something was watching me, but couldn't identify it. This feeling, like a ghost, cannot be seen but is always present in space. The isolation of this area not only gnawed at my mind, but also brought with it a series of inexplicable signs. Even though it all seemed like a coincidence, or an invisible fear I created, I still couldn't stop. Memories of strange vibrations, the shadow in the old building, and the feeling of something alive and moving underground, all still linger in me like an unfinished nightmare. And now, after leaving that place, I still can't escape that feeling I haven't really left yet. Maybe everything has stopped, but deep inside me, I know, that presence has never disappeared. The feeling of not being able to escape the strange vibrations and inexplicable signs continued to haunt me. Sometimes, I tell myself that I'm just imagining too much due to stress, but these events keep repeating over and over again, with no reasonable explanation. I tried many times, even though I didn't want to admit it, strange signs still lingered in my mind. That night, after examining the old roof, I stood in the cabin again, looking at the dusty bookshelves. The feeling of frustration and silence around me made me feel like something was rising from this space, even though I couldn't see it clearly. Strange noises from dark corners made me feel like something was wrong. It wasn't just the tired quiet of an isolated cabin in the middle of the forest, but an invisible presence that I couldn't explain. The cabin caretaker's words echoed in my head, "The quiet here is like no other." Those words now felt like a warning, a reminder that this was no ordinary place. And I began to realize that maybe this isolation had changed the people who were here before me, causing them to leave in fear. Strange sounds, movements that I couldn't clearly identify, all of them seemed to be challenging me to understand, but I didn't dare. When I went back to check the cabin one last time, I suddenly thought I heard a strange noise in the hallway, but when I entered, all was silence. I stopped, feeling something was wrong. Why do I hear those noises? Why is everything so quiet? Even though I know I shouldn't, I can't help but learn more. I looked at the roof, where I thought I felt some movement, but there was nothing but silence and darkness. In the end, I decided to leave, but it felt like a part of me had stayed in that cabin, a part that couldn't return, haunted by strange noises and mysterious presences in that quiet space. I drove out of the area, looked in the rearview mirror, and clearly felt an invisible presence following me, hidden in the darkness. Even though I tried to leave, I still couldn't escape the feeling that that place still haunted me. The further I drove away from the cabin, the more I felt like something was chasing me, not in the form of a figure, but in the strange vibrations I was experiencing. What I felt in the cabin, feelings that I couldn't explain, were still lurking in my mind, and I couldn't get rid of them. The dim lighting in the hallway added to my sense of mystery and tension. Gentle, irregular sounds like someone tapping on the wall made it impossible for me to shake the feeling of being watched. Every step I take, every little noise makes my heart beat harder. There was a pervasive sense of anxiety, not just because of the strange noises, but also because of what I felt behind me, as if something was lurking in the darkness, waiting. As I walked towards my room, all my senses were heightened. My eyes scanned every corner of the hallway, ready to spot anything out of the ordinary. The steady tapping, like a strange rhythm, seemed to come from the very wall I was walking along. I tried to find the source of the sound, but every time I turned around, there was nothing but locked doors and darkness. The inexplicable feeling persistently stuck with me. I could feel something, an invisible presence watching me, as if the darkness around me was not simply silence, but an entity observing my every move. With every step I took, I felt the space getting smaller and smaller, as if I was stepping into a trap from which I couldn't escape. Finally, I went back to my room, locked the door tightly and turned off the lights. However, it is not easy to shake off that feeling of tension. I sat down on the bed, cold sweat still stuck to my forehead, feeling like there was something out there, waiting for me. Closing my eyes, I tried to breathe evenly, but the dim light from the fluorescent lamp on the ceiling still couldn't dispel my insecurity. With each passing second, I felt more clearly that there was something that did not belong here, something lingering around me, invisible but always present. Whenever I think I can forget these strange events, they resurface in my mind, like a never-ending nightmare. There was a feeling I couldn't shake, a fear I couldn't explain rationally. Maybe I was too stressed. Maybe I was too tired, but there was something in the air, in this building, that made me unable to relax, unable to rest. I heard the soft tapping sound again. This time it was clearer, as if someone was walking towards my room. But when I turned on the light, nothing. The building fell silent again. A heavy and gloomy silence, as if this space had been taken over by a force that I could not understand, but clearly felt its every breath. I can't help but feel that there is something here, something that I cannot see but can feel in every breath, in every beat of my heart. This building is more than just a temporary shelter. It is a living organism, with secrets that I have never discovered, and maybe, I should never have discovered them. These inexplicable doubts kept spinning in my head. And although I tried to convince myself it was just too much stress, a part of me knew I had touched on something far beyond my ability to explain. This building, the figures in the dark, that presence, it was all part of a story I couldn't escape. That feeling still stuck with me, a vague, inexplicable fear, as if a part of me was still stuck in that old hotel grounds. Even though I was out of there, my body still hadn't escaped the black shadow and heavy silence of the hallway, where I felt something waiting. Every time I return to my thoughts about strange events, I clearly feel that it is not simply a chance encounter, but something invisible, yet very clear, still lurking in that space. Strange images, like a shadowy figure, are still imprinted in my mind. The signs were too obvious to be a coincidence. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I think I hear footsteps, small noises from somewhere behind me. I could have interpreted them as plays of the imagination, but deep inside me, I knew something else was watching. I can't forget the manager's eyes, the meaningful look when talking about the age of the building and people leaving because of strange incidents. Surely he knew something that I couldn't understand. Every time I remember those words, I can't help but feel tense, as if I'm caught in a vortex that I can't escape from. That building, with its long dark corridors and eerie noises, was not simply a shelter, but seemed to have some invisible power hidden underneath, waiting. Even though I tried to reason everything out rationally, inexplicable feelings continued to cling to me. Every step through that hallway, every door that closes, every shadow that passes in my peripheral vision reminds me of a presence I cannot expose. And even though I left, even though I tried to forget, I still couldn't get rid of the feeling that a part of me was left behind in those walls. That feeling wasn't something logic could explain, and it was that inexplicability that made it scarier than anything else. That strange feeling did not leave me. The wooden house was like a sheet covering everything, surrounding me with an unbearable silence. Even though I tried to accept it as part of the experience, I couldn't quell the feeling that something was wrong, as if the piece was built on a false foundation. The rustling of tree branches outside is a reminder of isolation, of the invisible distance between me and the world out there. The house is like another world, completely separate from everyday life. The first night, I struggled to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, strange sounds began to fill the space around me. At first there was just the sound of the wind whistling through the window, then the gentle cracking sound of objects in the room, as if they were moving on their own. I told myself it was just a change in wind and light, but every time I looked towards the radio, I couldn't help but realize that the sound coming from it was not a normal broadcast station. As the night continued to drag on, I couldn't escape the inexplicable feeling. The footsteps seemed so close, but every time I turned around, there was nothing but darkness. The feeling of being watched stuck with me, and although I tried to make sense of everything, I felt a shadowy presence, something just out of reach, existing only at the edges of awareness. Sometimes, I thought I heard someone whispering very close, but when I turned around, there was only silence, only dark shadows passing by in the corner of my eyes. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling anxious and refusing to let go, even though everything around me remained unchanged. The house still stood there, like a relic of the past, and I wondered if I could leave this place without being haunted by it for the rest of my life. Even when I sat down to continue writing the article, the weak light of the desk lamp still could not ease the tension in my body. Every time I stood up, strange noises echoed in the space, making it impossible for me to escape the feeling that someone was standing behind me, always watching my every move. And then, one night, I clearly felt that the house was more than just a temporary shelter. It was a slowly awakening nightmare, waiting to devour me. Every step I took in the hallway, every time I looked towards the dim light, I felt that presence, an invisible presence but strong enough to make the air around me suffocate. Perhaps this is the reason why people say that some doors, once opened, can never be completely closed. I don't know what else I'll face, but I know one thing for sure: not every secret in old houses can be explained. There are things that, once you open them, will never be the same again. My palms were sweaty as I stared at the radio, unable to believe what I had just heard. That voice, clearer than ever, once again echoed from the short waves, echoing throughout the room as if someone was calling me, urgently and urgently. My heart was beating so fast that I felt like it would burst. It felt like an invisible hand was squeezing my throat, making it impossible for me to breathe. My footsteps pounded across the cabin floor as I rushed to turn off the radio, but even as I did so, the shrill hum still rang in my ears. The whole space around me seemed to become heavy and terrifyingly quiet, as if the very air itself was weighing me down, making it impossible for me to escape the feeling of being watched. I tried to convince myself that it was just the delusion of a tired person, but that belief quickly faded as I turned back to look into the darkness outside the window, half hoping and half afraid that I would see a figure moving stealthily in the surrounding woods. Every gust of wind blowing through the pine tree on the porch startled me, and the strange whistling sound I heard through the branches only made me feel more uneasy. The silence of the forest seemed to be waiting for something, and I knew I couldn't stay any longer in this house. Those moments dragged on as if they had no end, like a nightmare that couldn't be escaped. I tried to return to my writing, using work to calm the fear rising within me. But every tap on the keyboard only makes me more nervous. I can't stop thinking about that voice. I know that what I am experiencing is not a coincidence. Something in this house, in this forest, is trying to communicate with me, and I can't escape it. In the late afternoon, when the drizzle began to fall, I felt the air in the cabin become cold and stuffy. The absolute silence of the house is only broken by the sound of the wind and the steady tapping of rain on the roof. I decided to make a small fire in the fireplace for warmth, but when I went out to collect firewood, the feeling that I was being watched was stronger than ever. Every noise around me made me alert, as if there was a shadow standing behind me, just waiting to make its presence known. But every time I turned around, there was only the wind blowing, no one there. I hurried back into the cabin, trying to hide my uneasiness with work, but as I sat down, a distinct click rang out from across the room. I looked towards the radio, and my heart skipped a beat again. The radio turned on automatically, and the voice rang out again, this time clearer than ever. It felt like the space in the cabin was shrinking, as if the radio was pulling me into another world, a world where I couldn't escape. My blood ran cold, and I could do nothing but stare at the radio, feeling this strange presence slowly taking over the space. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, but another part couldn't shake the feeling of being called to something deep in the darkness of this house. That feeling, when I turned off the radio, seemed not just of silence but of a strange absence, a feeling like the air itself had stopped moving. I sat there in the empty room, the sounds of tree branches outside sounding like part of a hazy dream, not truly present, but just a reminder of something lurking just out of sight. Waves of fear still lingered in the air, seemingly permeating every corner of the cabin. I couldn't breathe, my mind was engulfed in chaos. Even though I tried to hide, I couldn't help but feel that presence creeping into my every step. That voice, that eerie feeling that someone or something was watching me, it didn't leave me. Everything in the cabin seemed distorted, my breathing was heavy, my heart pounded like a warning bell in my head. I can't explain how this isolation and silence makes me feel so suffocated. Part of me wanted to run, wanted to leave this hellish place, but another part couldn't. I felt drawn into something I couldn't understand, and that made me even more scared. Everything became blurred, as if this reality was melting and disappearing, leaving only shadows, unknown sounds, and the haunting of that voice. I tried to reassure myself that this was just a product of isolation, stress and fatigue. But, when the wind blew through the window, when I felt the silence outside, a feeling welled up inside me, as if it wasn't just me here in this cabin, but something waiting, searching. Finally, I decided I couldn't continue living in this insecurity anymore. I will leave. But just as I stood up to prepare to pack, a slight noise came from behind me, as if someone was entering the room. My breath caught in my throat. I turned around, my heart beating like thunder, but there was no one there. The door was still closed, there was only darkness outside. I breathed a sigh of relief, but couldn't help but feel that something never left me in this house. And I can't help but feel that, regardless of whether I leave or not, that feeling will stay with me forever. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, trying to stop the spinning feeling in my head and that darkness behind my eyelids. I heard that voice again, weak and echoing. My chest tightened when I realized it was burning in my mind, a ghost I couldn't escape. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to leave the cabin that night. I packed my things in a frenzy, almost tripping over the table legs in my haste. The overhead lights flickered violently, making the walls go crazy. The darkness, my breath panted in my throat, and I could feel every beat in my skull right away. Even the act of zipping up my suitcase felt strangely difficult, as if invisible hands were pulling it away from me. Part of me wondered if I saw the radio turn back on automatically, but every time I looked at it, it was still dark. Driving out of the cabin was stressful. The narrow dirt road seemed to blur at the corners of my vision, and each bump jolted my exhausted body. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I glanced in the rearview mirror repeatedly, half expecting to see something behind me. The forest was forced into an unlit corridor, swallowing my headlights for what felt like hours before I reached the main highway, my heart pounding violently. I could taste the bitter taste of fear in my mouth in the days that followed. I tried to explain the events to myself. I told my friends that it was just my imagination running wild in an old taxi with an ancient radio picking up strange signals, but whenever I closed my eyes, I relived those pulses of fear. I still felt the feeling of being watched and heard that disembodied voice calling my name through the static. An overactive imagination memory sometimes refused to fade in the quiet hours of the night. I will remember that hum and feel my chest tighten with anxiety. The question gnawing at me is whether I am truly free from whatever is trying to reach me. Even now I wonder if that presence can follow me through any static radio waves of laden whispering across the ether. After locking the door, turning off all the lights, and trying in vain to sleep in the comfort of my own home, because no matter how safe it was, I tried to feel every static hiss of a lonely night that brought me back to that cabin. That flashing light and that voice at the edge of my hearing was always just out of my reach, but close enough to make my heart thunder in my chest. And as much as I longed to dismiss the whole experience, I couldn't let go of the fear that it wasn't a dream at all. It was real somewhere out there. That distant crackling signal that could still be calling my name, waiting for me to pick up again. I felt the terror before I knew it. It was the late afternoon sun, though warm. The burning pressure and yellowness seemed unable to penetrate the thick air around me. My lungs felt tight, as if I had inhaled the smoke, but had no reason not to at least think that something was burning. I pedaled faster, hoping the claustrophobic feeling would go away if I kept moving. Instead, the heaviness settled deeper in my chest, and the uncomfortable prickling sensation on my scalp warned me that I was cycling into territory best left alone. I went on a mountain bike adventure that day, traversing narrow dirt roads through old farmland and abandoned farmhouses. The trails were rarely traveled, and I enjoyed the isolation until there was something changed in the atmosphere. As I ventured further, the vegetation along the road seemed more lifeless than usual. The colors were muted under the dull haze. Even the sky overhead seemed strangely subdued, as if a thin film had covered the clouds. My feet kept moving, but a distinct feeling of unease danced across my skin. As I approached a particularly desolate stretch of land, I saw a cluster of collapsing structures in the distance, the fence rusted barbed wire forming a winding perimeter, several barns, an old silo, and what looked like an old barn. I couldn't detect any signs of life, no vehicles, no footprints, nothing to indicate recent activity, but the smell persisted. The air was scorched, but not quite, with smoke filling my nose. It reminded me of scorched metal, or perhaps hot rocks. After a campfire, something unnatural. A feeling of confusion and tension, as if the air around me had been compressed, thicker, filled with a musty, electric smell. I can't understand what happened. The smoke, the light, the silence, it was all intertwined in a ghostly game that I couldn't decipher. As I stopped to breathe, trying to steady my heartbeat, I can't help but wonder why I'm still here. Memories of the dark night, of whispers on the radio, now return to my mind. The feeling of being watched, the feeling that something, an invisible presence, was waiting right behind me, always close, always ready. Those vague sounds, even though they could just be from the wind or insects, made me unable to escape my fear. Even though I tried to reason things out, I couldn't deny the feeling that something was wrong in this warehouse. It's possible that the scorched boards are just the remains of an old fire, but why is there that strange orange glow? Why does smoke rise and then disappear? And why can't I shake the feeling that there's something waiting for me at the end of this dark hallway? I looked around again, feeling the emptiness, but at the same time that tension was still present. I can't stand any longer. The feeling of fear and claustrophobia in the air was too much to bear, and I forced myself to turn back. Stepping outside, I was again overwhelmed by the silence around me. There was no sound, no signs of life. It's just me, standing in this loneliness, facing unanswered questions. My palms were still sweaty, and my steps echoed in absolute silence. I don't know what I'm running from, but part of me feels that the truth of what I've just experienced is hidden somewhere in this night, in the cracks of the old wall, and maybe, in the very voices I hear from the unconscious. Every step took me further and further from the warehouse, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was still behind me, waiting. I cycled with all my might, trying to put everything that had happened behind me. But, as soon as I crossed the threshold of the warehouse area, a strange feeling kept rising in my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about that eerie silence, about the unexplained movements in my peripheral vision, and about the distant groan echoing in the air. Every beat of my heart was a reminder that something unusual was waiting for me somewhere, in the darkness or after every step I took. My eyes still couldn't take their eyes off the shadow of the warehouse fading into my rear view. Every pedal stroke is like a struggle between continuing to run away and unquenchable curiosity. It felt like an invisible entity was watching me, quietly approaching and waiting for the right moment to appear. Every time I blinked, I thought there was someone or something in my sight, but when I turned my head there was only silence and dark shadows writhing in the weak afternoon light. Sweat was still pouring out, the flow was cold as I tried to breathe deeply, but couldn't dispel the heavy feeling in the air. Night approached and I could feel a change in the atmosphere, as if a spiritual storm was about to come. Every breath is heavy, I feel like I'm buried in the past, with what I've seen, the sounds, the darkness, and the silence of places I shouldn't go alone. As I continued driving, the feeling of something intangible following me became clearer. The sky was dark, the moonlight was just enough to dim everything around. The light rain continued to fall, covering the windshield and surroundings like a hazy curtain. Even though I moved away from the warehouse, I still couldn't dispel the unpleasant and haunting feeling that was clinging to me. The music emanating from the radio, the offbeat rhythm of the national song echoing in the quiet air, only added to the strangeness of the current situation. The feeling of unease refused to leave me. I looked at the fuel gauge and realized I was almost out of gas. I started to slow down and go around a small road, hoping to find a nearby gas station to stop and regain my composure. Even though nothing special appeared on the road ahead, a part of me felt uneasy, as if I was entering another world, a place that no longer belonged to me. When I parked and got out of the car, the rain fell gently on my hair, and the smell of damp earth and cool air helped me breathe easier. I looked around again, making sure no one was watching me, but there was still something vague in the air that made me feel like there was a close but invisible presence. I slowly walked out and entered the gas station. The empty space around me made me feel lost, as if there was no place for me to belong. Even though I could explain everything rationally, the feeling of panic continued to haunt me, like a nightmare I couldn't escape from. Again, I realized that a part of me still hadn't truly gotten over what happened in that warehouse. That feeling kept following me, drawing me into a strange loop, constantly recurring in my mind every night. The feeling of tension inside me wouldn't let go. Even though I stopped at a brightly lit, immaculately white gas station, everything around me still felt strange, as if I was looking through frosted glass. When I got back to the car, my hands were still shaking despite the warm drink in my hand. I wanted to convince myself that everything was just fatigue, an overreaction from exhaustion, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, always present, even in these quiet moments. I sat in the car, trying to regain my composure. My eyes still glanced through the rearview mirror again, but this time I couldn't get rid of my thoughts about the figure I thought I saw in the car. My breathing was still heavy and my head was dizzy, as if there was a ghost every moment. Strange noises still echoed in the space, like fingers sliding across the glass surface, not from outside the car but from inside, from within me. That cold feeling cannot be described in words. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, exited the gas station, and continued driving on the deserted road. Even though I had escaped that old warehouse where I felt the strange presence, the air was still thick, and a part of me always felt that there was something unexplained. The feeling of being watched, surrounded by something invisible, inescapable. No matter where I go, it seems like the memory of that night at the warehouse still can't leave my mind, the fear still clings, lasting with every passing moment. Every sign in the darkness, whether it was faint images or eerie sounds, made me feel like something was still there, waiting, watching me. The feeling of being watched, impossible to shake off, remained with me throughout the trip. Although I found some peace in the vast space of the forest, loneliness was like a shadow, always following my every step. As I set up camp, built a fire, and tried to cook, that feeling never left. The sounds of the forest, the birds, the rustling of leaves all became vague, as if surrounded by a mysterious, heavy membrane. The light from the flickering fire seemed to reflect ghosts in the air. The eyes glowed in the darkness, the eyes of an unknown creature, as if they looked right through me, suspended between this world and something else. When I saw them through the opening in the tent, a shiver ran down my spine. I tried not to panic, but the silence around me seemed to overwhelm me, making my heart beat so hard that I felt every beat in my throat. That night, I couldn't sleep. Everything, from the sounds around you to the images in your head, is distorted, hazy, and threatening. Even though I tried to make sense of everything, a part of me couldn't help but feel that there was something more than human waiting, watching me, and perhaps already existing in this place before I arrived. When dawn came, I felt exhausted. The fire had long since gone out, and although everything seemed normal, the memory of those sparkling eyes, the sound of something moving around my tent, was still vivid in my mind. Those eyes, an inexplicable presence, continued to haunt me, no matter how hard I tried to deny it. I began to search for a logical explanation, but I couldn't help but feel that, for a moment, I had awakened something in the darkness, something terrifying and real. Fear is not something I can control. It has become a part of me, sticking with me every step of the way. I don't know if I can truly escape what I encountered, but the urge to go back and face it never lets me go. That feeling, like a dark wave, followed me wherever I went, making it impossible for me to shake off the suspicion that I was not the only one in this world. This feeling of fear still haunts me, no matter how hard I try to let it go. Every night, the memories of the dim light, eyes sparkling in the dark, and unseen footsteps still linger. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had touched something ancient, something watching me from the shadows, testing my boundaries. On that day, as I sat by the lake, the scenery around me seemed to convey a warning. The lake's surface is as black as ink, not reflecting the surrounding world like a broken mirror. Gray clouds obscured the sunlight, leaving this space in unusual silence. The distant chirping of birds seemed to sound like a warning, that I had arrived in a place not meant for intruders like me. I tried to calm my mind, but no matter what I did, the silence still weighed heavily on me. Even Marcos, my companion, could not escape that anxiety. Everything seemed fine, but I felt something wasn't right, a strange feeling that was hard to describe, a oppression that made my heart pound, my boots touching the rough sand, making me even more afraid. Fear is not a strange feeling, but it is stronger than ever now that I am here, alone, near this place. The birds warned, the lake seemed unwilling to reflect the world, and I couldn't shake the thought that we were trespassing on a place long preserved, a place with an ancient history I couldn't understand. This feeling was as if I had awakened something that had been waiting for a long time, something that did not want to be discovered. The following nights, I couldn't sleep peacefully. The feeling of being watched always haunted me, as if the darkness had marked me and everything around me was reaching out towards me. No matter where I go, that fear still follows and cannot be dismissed. My mind continued to get lost in those hazy images, the eyes shining in the darkness, the strange sounds, and the undeniable presence I felt. No matter how I explain it, a part of me still can't believe that everything is just an illusion. There was something too real, too strong to be ignored, like a cold breeze passing by, like a shadow in the corner of my eye. Those events, whether imagined or real, still left an indelible mark on my mind. The weak light from the flashlight swept across the surface of the lake, the dim light illuminating the small waves, but it did nothing to help me feel more secure. Everything was still inexplicable, a strange silence surrounded me, making me feel like someone was lurking in the dark, observing our every move. I tried not to pay attention to the feeling of tension rising in my chest, but my heart was pounding, unable to calm down. I scanned the lakeshore, my flashlight flickering like a thread in the darkness, but there was nothing but darkness reflecting back. I sighed, feeling tired overshadowing all my thoughts. Marcos, sitting next to him, also felt the heavy atmosphere, the suffocating silence. It seems like this whole space is squeezing us tightly, making it impossible for us to escape. The faint sigh sounded again, this time closer, as if someone was standing just beyond our reach. I stared into the darkness, trying to see through it, but it kept disappearing every time the flashlight's light shined on it. It seems like something is playing a hidden game, following us, not allowing us to rest in peace. A cold feeling ran down my spine. Marcos and I said nothing, just exchanged a worried look. That feeling, an invisible presence and inexplicable tension, was something deeper than ordinary fear. Part of me wondered if we were really alone. Finally, I decided to step out of the safe circle of light and step closer to the lake shore, my flashlight still shining brightly. There was nothing but water, and silence prevailed. But that feeling, the feeling of eyes staring at me, wouldn't leave my mind. No matter how hard I tried to explain, there was still a part of me that couldn't ignore that feeling of being watched. I knew I couldn't stay any longer, and I couldn't let this fear control everything. Trying to calm myself, I returned to the campsite, and in the faint light of the fire, I could still feel that presence hovering, waiting, like a ghost lurking in the darkness, not letting me escape this fear. And as the night passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something out there that wasn't just my hallucination, but a dark truth that I couldn't yet fathom. And then, when we finally left, it felt like time had stopped for the entire night. Everything was strange and full of inexplicable doubts. The vague sounds still echo in my head, like an unforgettable chorus. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was pursuing us, waiting, or simply lurking in the darkness, invisible but clearly felt. No matter how hard I try to explain, maybe it's all just stress and fatigue, but a part of me still can't get rid of the memory of bright eyes in the night, light reflecting in the darkness, and gasps without origin. The sky gradually brightened, but the nightmare still refused to let go. Those fears continue to follow me like haunting streaks. Every time I close my eyes, I can still feel that presence, still hear the strange sounds echoing from those dark and heavy nights. As I drove away from that area, I couldn't completely shake the feeling of something darker, not just imagination, but maybe something that lay beneath the surface, somewhere we couldn't see, but was watching all the same. No matter where I go, I cannot forget that a part of me always stays that night, in the thick silence, where all those memories still wait, leaving their mark on my mind, like a secret that I can never fully understand. Stepping out of the car, I felt the cold, strangely quiet forest air. The sun set slowly, casting a gloomy orange light on the towering trees, creating long, dim shadows. All sounds seemed to be swallowed up, only the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves and my steps as I entered the abandoned area. The watchtower looked eerie in its solitude. Built entirely of wood, this structure is like a relic of the past, the link between humans and nature now in ruins. The wooden panels are worn and the paint is peeling off, creating a blurred image in the dim light of sunset. Even though I came here for work purposes, the feeling of insecurity from before still did not leave me. I stopped for a moment, looking around the area. It seemed like there was something in the air that made me uncomfortable, as if an invisible force was observing me. My eyes stopped on the cracks in the wooden wall of the watchtower, cracks that I couldn't explain why but from which I felt familiar. With every step I took, I felt the branches above my head gently move, as if something was quietly moving in the darkness, just waiting for my lack of attention. That feeling came back again, the feeling of being watched. I couldn't help but think of what I had heard, the strange sounds from the lake, from the shadow I felt following me. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that sigh, a sigh full of pain that I can't explain. In my heart, a doubt rose. Was it all just my imagination, or was there something invisible clinging to me, watching me in the quiet nights? I started checking my GPS again, trying to automate everything so I wouldn't have to face my fear. But no matter how busy I try to be with work, the tension in my body cannot be hidden. The sounds from the surrounding forest became clearer and clearer, as if something was waiting from behind the trees. And then, I felt the eyes of someone, or something, following me from an invisible distance, in a strange and uncomfortable way. The feeling that I had tried to bury in my mind surfaced again, as if this forest itself was holding back a secret that I wasn't brave enough to understand yet. Each step down the watchtower became heavier, as if an invisible force was pulling me closer, pushing me toward the darkness. When I finally got back to the car, I found I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even though I finished packing up and closed the door, I still felt that invisible gaze following me. It felt like there was something in this forest, an old entity, watching and waiting for the right moment to act. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my eyes caught the dim darkness reflected in the glass, but other than the dense shadows of the trees, there was nothing unusual. Everything was eerily quiet, and I wondered if I was imagining things. But a part of me, the part one couldn't convince with reason, knew that this silence was something else. I felt like I was retreating from a sacred area where my every move was observed. I drove down the dirt road, my eyes always glued to the rearview mirror, fear not letting me go. The houses faded away, and the forest, even though it was behind, still seemed like a dark shadow. The feeling of that presence persisted within me, unable to dispel, until I got as far away from that place as possible. I don't dare go back, but I know a part of me is still stuck with it. Nightmares I can't explain, images I can't dispel. The shadow I thought I saw at the top of the watchtower would still cling to me, a part of that forest that I couldn't leave, as if that forest had taken over a corner of my mind. And no matter how hard I tried to push it away, I knew that I would never forget that shadow, the shadow standing there, motionless and silent, in a space where time seemed to stop. The heavy feeling still did not let me go, even when the dim daylight dispelled the darkness of the night. Each step seemed to drag along a piece of unfinished memory. Vague images of the tower, of that shadow, of the feeling of being watched still cling to my mind. I can't get rid of them, no matter what I try. I feel as if some part of me has changed, or maybe I'm just suffering from prolonged stress and loneliness. On the way back, I realized that the doubts and silhouettes I had seen, no matter how rational, could not erase that feeling in me. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I wondered if that shadow had really disappeared. The sudden silence of the morning before I left, the strange silence in the forest, all seemed to have a way of making me unable to escape that feeling. No matter how I tried to rationalize it, the feeling persisted, not easily dismissed. Even when I got home, what I had gone through did not leave me. The tower, the shadow, and those strange breaths kept haunting me. I feel like I'm bringing back a part of it, the impressions that haven't completely subsided, like a scar that won't heal. That shadow, I don't know if it really exists or is just my imagination in moments of panic, but I know one thing for sure, not everything we see and feel can be explained by reason. The memories of that night, of the tower, the shadow, and the presence I couldn't understand, will stay with me forever. And no matter how hard I tried to forget, I knew that a part of me remained there, between the forest and that tower, a part of me that I would never be able to get back. The feeling of anxiety still stuck with me, even when I returned to normal life. These past few days, even though everything around me seemed to be back in place, the darkness of the tower still lingered in my mind, like a scar that wouldn't heal. Every time I tried to banish those thoughts, they returned with strange vividness, details that I couldn't explain. Sometimes, I hear strange sounds in the house. There are times when I stand under a dim light and feel an invisible presence still following me, still looking at me from the darkness, even though I am home and no longer in that place. The images of the tower, of the figure standing on the railing, are always present in me every time night falls. Even though I didn't report any strange things to the authorities, because I didn't want to be considered a lunatic, that nagging fear stuck with me. Sometimes I wonder if I created it all myself, a result of stress and fatigue, or if there really is something out there watching me, quietly waiting. Every night, I hear the floorboards creaking in my mind, feeling like someone is moving around me in the dark. I couldn't shake that worry, that I might have left some part of myself there, in the middle of that forest, in that tower. All I know is that its silence is still there, always covering me, never allowing me to forget that feeling. That feeling clings to me like an invisible watch, and even though I try to live a normal life, I can't help but feel that there is something in me and in this space that cannot be explained, that watch, whether real or not, will always be there, a part of me throughout this life. This ending is very haunting, evoking a persistent feeling of insecurity, as if something inexplicable still silently follows us. The tower, with its secrets never shared, becomes a symbol of the point of no return, of memories that never fade. Every step, every movement is monitored, and no matter how it is explained, that presence cannot be erased. That feeling is a powerful reminder of things that surpass our understanding and reason, making one have to live with them, unable to forget. Closing the story like that creates an atmosphere full of meaning and makes the reader wonder if the truth will ever be revealed, or if we are just facing the fear we ourselves have created. That tower and silhouette are proof that sometimes the truth, however scary, may not be what we want to find, and sometimes not knowing is the best thing. So today's story has ended, but the questions it brings can still echo in your mind. Thank you for taking the time to listen and share your emotions with me. If you find the story interesting, don't forget to press like and subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. See you again in more interesting videos. Wishing you all a peaceful and good night.